She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She simply stood in a doorway in Mayfair, holding a box of wedding lace, and watched the man she was about to marry kiss another woman. Not quickly. Not accidentally. The way men kiss women they have chosen. Eleanor Ashcombe had been chosen too once. Or so she believed. If you've ever given your loyalty to someone who was already gone before they left, this story is for you. Subscribe to our channel, follow every part to the end, and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The morning of April the 14th, 1885. Eleanor Ashcombe woke before her maid arrived. She had done that every morning for the past 3 weeks. Not from excitement, though she had told herself it was excitement, but from something quieter and harder to name, the particular restlessness of a woman who has arranged her entire life around a future that has not yet arrived, and is terrified in the small and honest hours before dawn that something is wrong. She would not have said that aloud. Not to her mother, who had spent months coordinating with dressmakers and florists. Not to her younger sister, who spoke of Eleanor's wedding with a brightness that made Eleanor feel guilty for not matching it. And certainly not to Julian, who signed his letters with the words she had read so many times the paper had gone soft at the folds. Soon, you will be the center of my world. She believed him. That was the thing she would not be able to forgive herself for later. Not that he lied. Men had always lied. But that she believed him wholly, quietly, without reservation, the way she had been raised to believe the people she loved. Eleanor dressed without fuss, chose the pale blue traveling gown her mother had approved for the Mayfair appointment, and pressed Julian's letter flat inside her small leather case beside the box of embroidered wedding lace she was bringing to Madame Rouchard's shop. It was by any measure a perfectly ordinary morning. She had no idea it was the last one she would ever have. Madame Rouchard's establishment occupied the second and third floors of a narrow Georgian building on a quiet street just off Berkeley Square. The shop had dressed 3 generations of aristocratic brides. The waiting room smelled of beeswax and something floral that Eleanor could never identify. Roses pressed into fabric, perhaps, or powder worked into the lining of 100 veils. Eleanor arrived at 10:30 with her mother, Lady Ashcombe, and her personal maid, Agnes. Her mother surveyed the anteroom with the particular expression she reserved for situations she was actively managing. "They said our appointment is the first of the afternoon session," she said, removing her gloves finger by finger. "We'll have the fitting room to ourselves." Madame Rouchard mentioned another client was expected late morning, Agnes said carefully. Lady Ashcombe dismissed this. "We shan't overlap." But they did. The woman in the cream walking suit was already descending the main staircase when Eleanor and her mother were shown in. A woman Eleanor did not know by face, only by the particular way she moved, as though the space around her existed to accommodate her rather than the reverse. Dark hair, precisely dressed. A profile that suggested she had been told more than once that she was beautiful and had absorbed this information as fact rather than compliment. Their eyes did not meet. The woman swept past with a nod to the shop attendant and a single glance, brief, assessing, entirely uninterested at Eleanor. Eleanor felt nothing particular. Only the faint awareness that the woman was someone. Someone whose name she should perhaps have known. She did not know it yet. She would. The fitting took the better part of an hour. Eleanor stood on the low wooden platform in the inner workroom while 2 seamstresses made final adjustments to the bodice, and her mother circled her with the expression of a general reviewing fortifications. The gown was ivory silk, with a long train, simple by the current fashion, which her mother considered tasteful, and Eleanor considered merciful. She had never wanted to feel like an ornament. "Stand straighter," her mother said. Eleanor straightened. "You look very well," Agnes offered from the corner, and Eleanor gave her a small, grateful look. She did feel in that moment something close to happiness. Not the bright, uncomplicated kind. The kind that carries a faint tremor in it. The happiness of someone who has waited a long time for something and is not entirely sure they deserve it. She touched the lace at her cuff. Julian's letter was in her case. She thought of the line she always came back to. "Soon you will be the center of my world. 3 more weeks." "Madame Rouchard," her mother was saying, "the hem on the left side is still." "I'll ask one of the girls to bring the box of trim I left in the sitting room," the seamstress murmured and slipped through the side door. Eleanor waited, and then she heard Julian's voice. It came from the other side of the wall, from the small private sitting room that connected the workroom to the main corridor. Muffled, but unmistakable. That particular rhythm of speech she could have identified in a crowded street. She had listened to that voice across dinner tables for 11 months. She assumed for one full breath that he had come to surprise her. That he had decided to meet her here, which was unusual and slightly improper, but not impossible. Julian sometimes did impulsive things, and then laughed at the look on her face. She stepped off the platform. "Eleanor," her mother began. "I'll just be a moment." She moved toward the side door, still half smiling. She put her hand on the door. She pushed it open. The room was small. A settee, 2 chairs, a writing table. A tall window that faced the courtyard. Julian was standing near the window. The woman in the cream suit was standing very close to him. Eleanor had one moment, one suspended crystalline moment, in which she registered what she was seeing without understanding it. The proximity. The angle of Julian's body turned toward the woman and not away. The woman's hand gloved, resting against his chest. Then the woman said low and unhurried, "In a few weeks we shall both belong to someone else." And Julian answered, "Only in name." Eleanor did not move. Julian raised his hand and covered the woman's hand where it rested against him. Not pulling it away. Covering it. Holding it there. And he lowered his head and kissed her slowly, with the ease of someone kissing a person they have kissed many times before. There was no confusion in it. No accident. No hesitation that might have allowed Eleanor to construct some alternative explanation. Only the brutal, clarifying simplicity of a choice being made. The box of lace slipped from Eleanor's hands and struck the floor. Both of them turned. Julian went the color of chalk. Eleanor, she did not hear the rest. She was already backing through the door, and the door was swinging closed between them, and the seamstress was somewhere behind her, asking a question she couldn't parse, and her mother was saying her name, and the walls of the fitting room were very close, and the floor was uncertain beneath her feet, and she needed air. She needed to get out of this building. She made it to the top of the main staircase. Then her legs stopped working. She did not lose consciousness completely. She was aware distantly of descending of the carpet against her hands, of her mother's voice going sharp and frightened above her, of Agnes crying out. She was aware of the particular cold that comes up through the floor of an old building in April, the way it seeps through fabric and skin and settles against bone. She was aware of a man crouching beside her, not Julian. The voice was wrong, lower, more deliberate, the voice of someone accustomed to giving instructions and having them followed without repetition. "Get her off the stairs. Here, take her arm, gently." Eleanor was moved to the landing, seated against the wall with her back supported. She heard the man say something about a carriage, and someone was sent at a run. She opened her eyes. The man crouching in front of her was a stranger. 40, perhaps a little under. Dark hair threaded with gray at the temples. A face that would have been called severe, if not for the expression currently on it, which was not severity, but something more careful. The focused attention of someone who is determining what is actually wrong before deciding what to do about it. He was watching her with gray eyes that gave nothing away. "Can you hear me?" he said. "Yes," Eleanor said. Her voice was perfectly steady, which surprised her. "Are you injured?" "No." He studied her for a moment with the air of someone who does not entirely trust the answer, but is choosing to accept it provisionally. "Your color is wrong. Don't try to stand yet." Eleanor would have said something pointed about being told what to do by a stranger, but her hands were shaking, and she thought the point might lose something in delivery. "I know what happened," she said instead, which was not what she had intended to say. The man did not ask her to clarify. He only waited. "I saw something," she said. "Someone She stopped. She looked at the floor. "It doesn't matter." "It clearly does." She looked up at him. He did not look away. There was something in his manner that was not unkind exactly, but was entirely without performance. He was not attempting to comfort her. and the absence of the attempt was unexpectedly more steadying than comfort would have been. "I'm all right," she said. "You're not, but you will be." He rose, straightening his coat. "Your carriage has been sent for. There will be someone with you until it arrives." He spoke to Agnes, gave her quiet instructions, and stepped back. He did not hover. He did not make the moment about himself. Eleanor watched him cross the landing toward the upper corridor. And then a door opened, and Lady Cecily Marwood came down the stairs. Eleanor recognized her then. Not from personal acquaintance, they had never been formally introduced, but from the season. From rooms she had stood in, faces she had catalogued without meaning to. Lady Cecily Marwood, daughter of the late Earl of Ashford, current reigning jewel of the upper drawing rooms. The woman whose engagement to the Duke of Ravensmere had been the subject of considerable conversation the previous winter. The woman whose hand Julian had been holding, whose lips he had kissed. Cecily descended the staircase without haste, adjusting one glove at the wrist, and then she saw Eleanor on the landing, and her step slowed, just for a fraction of a second, too brief for anyone else to notice a pause, so controlled it was almost more frightening than a flinch would have been. Then she continued. She reached the landing. She passed. And the man who was still on the landing, who had stopped when the door opened, said in a voice suddenly flat as a closed door, "Lady Cecily." Cecily stopped. She turned. And for the first time some of the composure shifted, not much, and only for a moment, but Eleanor saw it. "Your Grace," Cecily said. Eleanor looked at him. She looked at the title she had just heard applied to him, and the way he was looking at Cecily, steady, without expression, but with the quality of attention that precedes a very long reckoning. And she understood. The man who had helped her off the floor. The man who had sent for her carriage and spoken to her maid and crouched on a landing to make sure she did not pass out on a staircase, was the Duke of Ravensmere, Cecily's fiancé. Eleanor's voice came out quieter than she intended. "She is to be your wife." It was not a question. Her voice barely moved, but Adrian turned to look at her, and in the looking something shifted in him too. A tightening around the jaw. A stillness that was not calm, but something just underneath calm, pressing up against its surface. "Yes," he said. Eleanor held his gaze. "Then I believe, Your Grace, we have both been deceived." Nobody spoke. Cecily's expression for one unguarded moment was utterly unreadable. Not guilt and not defiance and not fear, but the look of a woman calculating something very quickly. Then Julian appeared at the top of the stairs. He saw Eleanor. He saw Adrian. He saw Cecily. And he stopped. The silence that followed was the loudest thing Eleanor had ever heard. Julian came down the stairs slowly, the way a man descends when he has not yet decided what story he is going to tell. "Eleanor," he said, reaching the landing. "Whatever you think you saw, I know what I saw." Her voice was still quiet, still steady. She was not certain how that was possible, but she held on to it the way you hold on to a railing in the dark. "You told her that in a few weeks you would both belong to someone else, and she said only in name." Julian's jaw tightened. "You misheard." "I did not mishear you, Julian. I have been listening to your voice for 11 months. I know its every quality. I know when you are lying. I knew before today that something was wrong. I simply chose to believe your letters instead of my instincts." She looked at him. "That was my mistake, not yours, mine." "Eleanor, please." "Don't," she said. One word, clean and final as a door closing. She looked at Adrian. "Thank you for your assistance, Your Grace. I'm sorry you had occasion to give it." She rose from the floor, her legs held, and walked without hurrying down the remaining stairs and out through the front door of Madame Rouchard's shop, onto the street where her carriage had just arrived, and she climbed in and closed the door and sat with her hands folded in her lap, and did not allow herself to feel anything at all until the carriage had turned the corner, and London's most expensive street had disappeared from the window. Then she opened her hand. She was still holding the wedding lace. She had been holding it the entire time. She set it on the seat beside her and turned her face to the window. Outside London continued as it always did. Indifferent crowded relentlessly itself, unbothered by the private collapses of the people moving through it. Eleanor watched it pass, and she thought, so that is what it feels like, to be loved only on paper. She did not tell her family that night. She sat through dinner with her parents and her sister Charlotte, and spoke when spoken to, and ate enough that no one would ask questions. She complimented the soup. She listened to her father discuss a land matter in Berkshire. She answered Charlotte's question about the fitting with a single word fine and did not elaborate. When she reached her room, she took off the engagement ring. Not in anger, not dramatically. She simply removed it, eased it over her knuckle, and held it in her palm for a moment. This small circle of gold, with its single diamond, that Julian had given her on a December afternoon in her father's drawing room, while her mother cried happy tears in the doorway. She set it on the dressing table. She did not throw it. She did not look at it. She went to bed. She did not sleep. She did not sleep for 3 nights. On the first morning she told Agnes she had a headache. Agnes brought tea and asked no questions, which was why Eleanor had always trusted her. On the second morning her mother knocked and asked if she was ill, and Eleanor said yes. A headache, which was true in the technical sense that her head felt as though it had been emptied and refilled with something heavier than it used to contain. On the third day, Julian sent a letter. She held it unopened for a full hour. Then she opened it. He wrote that what she had seen was not what it appeared. He wrote that he had been under considerable strain, and that Cecily had initiated what Eleanor had witnessed, and that he had been about to put a stop to it. He wrote that he loved Eleanor, and had never stopped loving her, and that he begged her to allow him to explain in person. Eleanor read the letter twice. She folded it carefully. She placed it in the fire. She watched it burn. She did not betray me, Julian, she thought. You did. Don't insult me by handing me the match. That was the moment something changed in her. She couldn't have explained it precisely. But the part of her that had been waiting for an explanation, for a reason, for some version of events that would allow her to feel less foolish, went very quiet. And another part of her, a part she had not known, was there, stood up in its place. It did not feel like strength. Not yet. It felt more like the first breath after a long time underwater. Raw, disorienting, but real. On the 4th day, her mother came into her room without knocking. Lady Ashcombe sat down in the chair beside the window, arranged her skirts, and said, "You need to consider the family's position, Eleanor." Eleanor was at the writing table. She turned in her chair. "And what position is that, Mother?" "Julian Cresswell is prepared to proceed with the wedding as planned. His family has made that clear. If we move carefully, this unpleasantness need not become public. A quiet resolution." "A quiet resolution," Eleanor repeated. "Yes. What does that mean exactly? That I marry him and say nothing, and smile at dinner parties and pretend I didn't see what I saw?" "I mean that you protect this family's reputation. I have been protecting this family's reputation since I was old enough to be presented." Eleanor's voice was not raised. It was very precise. "I wore the right dresses, and said the right things, and smiled at the right men, and I got engaged to Julian Cresswell because he was suitable, and his family was suitable, and everyone said it was an excellent match." She looked at her mother directly. "He was kissing another woman, Mother, in her wedding month, 3 weeks before the ceremony. I was not confused. He was not startled into it. He chose it. He has been choosing it." Lady Ashcombe's expression did not change. "Men sometimes. No." The word landed like a hand on a table. "I will not hear that sentence finished. Not in this room. Not from you." Her mother was silent. Eleanor said, "I have spent my entire life protecting other people's dignity. I would like to know who in this house is going to protect mine." The question sat between them. Lady Ashcombe's chin dropped very slightly, and in that small motion was something Eleanor had never seen on her mother's face before, something that might have been shame. "I will speak to your father," her mother said finally. "Thank you," said Eleanor. After her mother left, Eleanor sat very still for a long moment. Then she picked up her pen. She began to write. The letter was not to Julian. It was not to her solicitor and not to the family's man of business. It was to the Duke of Ravensmere. She wrote carefully, formally, without self-pity and without drama. Your Grace, I write not as a woman in distress, but as one who has come to understand that you and I are in possession of the same information regarding two individuals whose actions affect us both. If it is your intention to address this matter quietly and with appropriate protection of those who have been wronged, I believe a brief conversation would be to our mutual benefit. I do not ask for your assistance. I ask for the opportunity to exchange what each of us knows before either of us acts. If you find this proposal without merit, I understand. Lady Eleanor Ashcombe. She read it over once. She thought exactly what she meant. She sealed it and gave it to Agnes with instructions to deliver it directly. She did not know if he would respond. She did not know what she would do if he did not. But for the first time in 4 days, she was not waiting for someone else to decide. Adrian Wycliffe, Duke of Ravensmere, received Eleanor's letter at 9 o'clock on a Thursday morning and read it standing at his study window, with the quality of attention he usually reserved for legal documents. He read it twice. He had not expected to hear from her. After the scene on the landing, which he had been replaying in the way of a man who needs to understand exactly what happened before he decides what to do, he had assumed she would retreat to her family and allow the quiet machinery of aristocratic damage control to absorb the situation. He had assumed she would be managed. He recognized now, been wrong about that. He turned the letter over and read it again. I do not ask for your assistance. I ask for the opportunity to exchange what each of us knows before either of us acts. He set the letter down. He had spent the 4 days since Mayfair, not as Eleanor had spent them, not in grief, or not primarily in grief, but in the particular cold fury of a man who has spent 35 years believing that the things under his care were under his control, and has discovered they were not. He had, within hours of returning from Mayfair, engaged his solicitor to review the terms of the marriage settlement with Cecily's family. Not because he intended to act immediately, but because he needed to understand the full shape of what he was dealing with before he made any move. He had instructed that no further social commitments be extended in Cecily's name. He had declined her family's request for a call with a single polite line that communicated to anyone experienced in reading between such lines that something had changed. He had not yet spoken directly to Cecily. There was a reason for that. Adrian Wycliffe was not a man who acted before he knew the ground beneath his feet, and the ground at the moment was shifting in ways he had not yet fully charted. Cecily's betrayal was clear. The nature of it was less so. How long had it been going on? What she had told Julian, what Julian knew about him. Whether this had been something organic, two people who had made a reckless choice, or something calculated. The distinction mattered. The solicitor's preliminary review had already turned up one thing that made the question of calculation considerably more urgent. He picked up Eleanor's letter one more time. Then he sat down and wrote back. His reply reached Ashcombe House at 11 o'clock the same morning. Eleanor was at the writing table in her room. Agnes brought it on a small tray. Eleanor broke the seal. Lady Ashcombe, I find your proposal entirely reasonable, and I respect the precision with which you have framed it. I suggest we meet at Ravensmere House at 2 o'clock today. You may bring your maid. The conversation will be private. Ravensmere. Eleanor read it once. Agnes, she said, tell the carriage to be ready at 1:30. Yes, my lady. Agnes paused at the door. Your mother. My mother is not invited. Agnes, to her considerable credit, did not even look surprised. Ravensmere House was everything the name suggested. Large, old, imposing in the particular way of English houses that have been standing long enough to develop opinions about who deserves to enter them. Eleanor was shown to a sitting room on the first floor that smelled of leather and beeswax and something faintly cedar, and she waited 3 minutes before Adrian came in. He did not circle pleasantries. He did not offer her sympathy. He offered her a chair and a glass of water, and then sat across from her with his elbows on his knees and said, Tell me what you know. Everything. I'll do the same. Eleanor studied him for a moment. You are remarkably direct for a duke. You are remarkably composed for a woman 4 days out of a considerable shock. I have had 4 days to decide what I am going to do about it, she said. Composure follows decision. Something moved across his face, not quite a smile, but the very near neighbor of one. Then let us both be composed. Tell me what you heard. Eleanor told him. She did not dress it up or soften it. She gave him Julian's exact words and Cecily's exact words and described what she had seen without embellishment or editorial, the way she would have described a set of figures in an accounting ledger with precision, because precision was what the moment required. When she finished, Adrian was quiet for a moment. How long had you suspected something was wrong? The question landed in a soft place. Eleanor looked at him steadily. Longer than I admitted to myself. Did you have anything specific? Nothing I could name. A pattern of small things, his attention elsewhere in rooms, letters that were warm in language and thin in substance. The way he sometimes looked at me as though he was checking something off a list. She paused. I attributed it to the pressures of preparing for a wedding. I told myself I was being nervous. I preferred that explanation. And now I prefer accurate ones. Adrian nodded once slowly, in the manner of a man filing something precisely where it belongs. Then he said, My solicitor brought something to my attention yesterday, during the review of the marriage settlement. Eleanor waited. Cecily, or rather her family's solicitor, had been pressing for a particular clause to be added in the final stages of negotiation. The clause would have given her family's estate a secured interest in a portion of Ravensmere's agricultural income for the first 10 years of the marriage. It was framed as a family provision, standard language cleverly buried. Would you have signed it? I don't sign documents I haven't read. His voice was flat. But I would have read it eventually, and by then, the terms would already have been established in correspondence. It would have been extremely inconvenient to retract. Eleanor was quiet for a moment, turning this over. She wasn't only seeking an advantageous marriage, she was seeking to extract from it while still maintaining alternatives. That is my current understanding. She wanted your title and your income, Eleanor said slowly, and she wanted Julian as well. Yes. And Julian wanted a respectable match with a good family name, Eleanor said, and he wanted Cecily as well. Yes. They each wanted the safety the other person offered, and the excitement the other person couldn't give them. That appears to be the case. Eleanor sat with this for a long moment. That's not love, she said finally. That's just greed. Adrian looked at her directly, for a sustained moment, the kind of look that actually sees what it's looking at, rather than the polite social approximation of looking. No, he said, it's not love. The fire crackled. Outside London went on being London. What do you intend to do? Eleanor asked. I intend to end the engagement to Cecily, Adrian said. I will not remain engaged to a woman who has both deceived me and attempted to manipulate the legal terms of our union for her family's financial advantage. But, he paused, if I do it publicly, or in a way that invites questions, the inquiry will not stop at Cecily and Julian. You will be drawn into it. Eleanor had known this. She had known it since the landing. Yes. A woman whose engagement ended under these circumstances in the same story at the same time is not simply a victim of unfortunate events. She becomes the subject of speculation. The questions people will not ask about a duke, they will absolutely ask about an unmarried woman of 25. His voice was matter-of-fact, not cruel, simply precise. I do not want to end Cecily's engagement in a way that destroys your chances of rebuilding your life. Eleanor looked at him. She had not expected that. He said it the way someone states a logistical constraint, not the way someone offers a kindness. And yet it was a kindness she recognized, simply a variety she had not often encountered, one that came wrapped in analysis rather than sentiment. What do you propose instead? She said. I don't propose anything, he said. I told you I asked what you know. I told you what I know. The next step belongs to you. Eleanor held his gaze. You could end this tonight, she said. You have the power to do it. Yes. But you're asking me first. Yes. She was quiet. Most men in your position would simply act. Most men in my position, Adrian said, Have never watched a woman faint on a staircase and then get up and say, "I believe we have both been deceived," in a voice like she is discussing the weather. He paused. You were not fainting from weakness. You were fainting from shock. And by the time you stood up, you had already decided to handle it yourself. I have no interest in overriding that decision. Eleanor studied him for a long, careful moment. Outside, a clock somewhere in the house marked the quarter hour. She said, "Then here is what I know. Julian will attempt to frame this as a misunderstanding. He will say, Cecily pursued him, and he was caught in a moment of weakness. He will attempt to cast himself as a man momentarily led astray, sympathetic, salvageable. And some people will believe him. Yes. Unless," Eleanor said, "we can demonstrate that this was not a moment of weakness, that it was a sustained arrangement." Adrian looked at her with new attention. "What are you suggesting?" "I am suggesting," Eleanor said carefully, "that before either of us acts publicly, we find out how long this has been going on. When they first met privately, who knew? Whether anyone helped arrange meetings." She set her hands flat on her knees. "If this was a single reckless afternoon, Julian and Cecily will carry it quietly, and the world will let them. But if it was months, if it can be demonstrated, then they cannot simply reframe the story. The story becomes too large to reframe." Adrian was still watching her. "You want documentation," he said. "I want the truth to be undeniable," she said. "I do not want justice that depends on people believing me. I want evidence they cannot argue with." There was a long pause. Then Adrian leaned back in his chair. "I have a man," he said. "He handles certain discrete matters for my estate. He is very thorough." "How soon can he begin?" "He already has," Adrian said. "I set him to it 3 days ago. I was going to use what he found unilaterally. But," he stopped. "It's your story as much as mine. You should be part of what is done with it." Eleanor did not smile. But something in her chest, something that had been very tight and very cold since April the 14th, loosened very slightly. "Thank you, Your Grace," she said. "Adrian," he said. In private. She looked at him. "We are apparently facing the same problem together," he said. "I have no interest in maintaining ceremony about it." Eleanor considered this. "Eleanor," she said. He nodded once precisely in the manner of a man filing one more thing exactly where it belongs. And that unremarkably without sentiment or ceremony was how it began. That evening, Julian Cresswell called at Ashcombe House and was told that Lady Eleanor was not receiving visitors. He sent a message in. Eleanor read it, set it aside. He sent another. She did not read the second one. From her window she could see the street below where his carriage waited with a patience its owner apparently lacked. Julian paced briefly beside it, looked up toward the house once with an expression she could read even from 3 floors up. He expected her to appear. He expected the door to open. He had always expected she understood now that she would be there when he needed her. That her patience was inexhaustible. That her forgiveness could be counted on the way one counts on furniture to be in its place when one returns to the room. Julian Cresswell climbed back into his carriage. He had spent 11 months not seeing Eleanor Ashcombe. He was about to spend considerably longer wishing he had. 3 streets away, in the study at Ravensmere House, Adrian Wycliffe sat reading a preliminary report from his inquiry agent. 3 pages. Dense and careful. Dates. Locations. Names of those who had carried messages. The first documented meeting between Julian Cresswell and Lady Cecily Marwood that had not been a public social engagement. It had been in November. 4 months ago. 2 months after Julian and Eleanor had become engaged. 2 months after Cecily's family had begun negotiating her match with Adrian. Adrian set the report down. He thought about Eleanor on the staircase holding the wedding lace, her hands completely steady. He thought about what she had said in his study. "I do not want justice that depends on people believing me. I want evidence they cannot argue with." He picked up his pen. He wrote 4 words at the top of a fresh sheet. "Find me the letters." He sanded it, folded it, sealed it. He called for his man and sent it. and in the quiet of the study with London moving outside his windows and the fire burning low. Adrian Wycliffe, who had spent 35 years believing that the things under his care were safe, understood, for the first time, that there were two things he now needed to protect: his name, and the dignity of a woman he had met 4 days ago who had asked for nothing and offered something he had not known he was missing. I was not yet sure what to call that. But he was certain, with the precision of a man who reads every document before he signs it, that he had not been wrong about her. The letters arrived in pairs that week. One always from Julian, one always from his family's solicitor. Two different styles of the same argument. The first warm and pleading, the second cool and procedural, both carrying the same assumption underneath, that Eleanor would eventually come back to the table. She did not respond to either. What she did instead was read them carefully, note the dates, and place them in a leather portfolio she kept in the bottom drawer of her writing desk. Not because she needed them yet, because she had begun to understand somewhere in the precise and quiet part of her mind that had been sharpening itself since the morning on the staircase that documentation was everything. That the difference between a woman who was wronged and a woman who could prove it was the difference between being believed and being managed. She was done being managed. On the 5th morning after Mayfair, she rose at 6, dressed without waking Agnes, and went down to the morning room before anyone else in the house was moving. She sat at the small writing table near the window, with a cup of tea that went cold beside her, and worked through what she knew with the methodical attention her father had taught her when he showed her how to review the estate accounts at 14. The facts were these. Julian and Cecily had been meeting privately since at least November. Adrian's agent had confirmed as much in the preliminary report. 2 months after Eleanor's engagement. 2 months into Cecily's negotiation with Ravensmere. Both of them simultaneously conducting what appeared on paper to be entirely proper matches, while privately maintaining something that was neither proper nor accidental. They had not stumbled into this. They had chosen it, sustained it, and concealed it. That was not a moment of weakness. That was a plan. The question that mattered now was not what they had done. She knew what they had done, but how they intended to manage the consequences. Because they would manage them. Julian was already trying. His letters demonstrated exactly how: first the appeal to her emotions, then the procedural letter from his solicitor, reminding her father of the terms of the engagement contract, the implied suggestion that a public dissolution would be damaging to all parties, and that a quiet continuation was the sensible path forward. Sensible. That word. She had been told all her life to be sensible. She picked up her pen and wrote 3 lines, then stopped, read them back, and threw the page into the fire. She was not ready to write the letter she needed to write. Not yet. She needed one more piece of information before she moved. She needed to know whether the letters existed, the ones Adrian had sent his agent to find. Agnes found her there at 7:30, cold tea and a fire that had burned low, and did not comment on either. She simply added a log, poured fresh tea from the pot she'd brought down, and set a plate of buttered bread on the table, with the efficiency of a woman who has spent years caring for someone who forgets to eat when she is thinking. "There is a note," Agnes said, setting a small sealed envelope beside the plate. Eleanor looked at it. The seal was plain wax, no crest. The handwriting on the front was not Julian's. She broke it open. 4 lines. Unsigned, but she knew the hand by now. She had seen it once in that precise and economical note from Ravensmere House. The letters exist. 7 of them. Spanning November to March. My man has confirmed their content. They are sufficient. When you are ready, tell me how you wish to proceed. The decision remains yours. Eleanor read it twice. 7 letters. 5 months. She set the note down, picked up the bread, and ate it standing at the window, looking out at the gray April morning, where a delivery cart was making its slow way along the street below, and a woman in a dark coat was walking a dog that had no interest in walking anywhere. 7 letters, spanning the entirety of her engagement. Julian had been writing to Cecily, or she to him, or both, across every week that Eleanor had been reading his letters about how she would be the center of his world. She set the bread down. She went upstairs, took the leather portfolio from the bottom drawer, added Adrian's note, and returned downstairs to put on her coat. "My lady." Agnes was at the hall door. "I need the carriage." Your mother hasn't come down yet. I know. Eleanor buttoned her coat. Don't tell her where I've gone until I'm back. Agnes looked at her steadily for a moment, with the expression of a woman who has served the same family long enough to understand that certain instructions should be followed without discussion. Of course, she said, and went for the coachman. The offices of Hartwell and Mace solicitors occupied the ground floor of a narrow building in Gray's Inn Road. Mr. Hartwell had been the Ashcombe family solicitor for 22 years and had the manner of a man who had heard everything and been surprised by very little of it. He was surprised now. He sat across from Eleanor, both hands flat on his desk, and looked at her with the careful expression of a man reassessing a situation he thought he had understood. "Lady Eleanor," he said, and then stopped because she had placed the portfolio on his desk and opened it and was laying out its contents in a row with the quiet efficiency of someone who has already organized her argument and is presenting it in the order she intends to make it. "The engagement contract specifies a penalty clause in the event of dissolution initiated by Lord Cresswell's family," she said. "I want to understand the precise terms. I also want to understand what documentation would be required to establish that the dissolution was precipitated by breach of conduct on Lord Cresswell's part, rather than by mutual withdrawal." Hartwell looked at the documents on his desk, and then at Eleanor. "Lady Ashcombe," he said carefully, "your father has not yet spoken to me about— My father does not know I'm here." She met his eyes without flinching. "I am asking as the party to the contract, Mr. Hartwell. I am 25 years old and I have every legal standing to ask the question." Another pause. Hartwell cleared his throat. "You do," he said. "Yes." "Then please answer it." He answered it. He took 40 minutes and his own considerable precision, which Eleanor matched, and by the time she rose to leave, she understood exactly what the documentation needed to demonstrate, exactly which terms gave the Cresswell family no legal avenue of quiet retreat, and exactly what she would need from Adrian's agent to make the case irrefutable. She shook Hartwell's hand at the door. "This conversation is confidential," she said, "as all my conversations are, my lady. I will return when I have additional documentation to provide." She walked back out into Gray's Inn Road, where the air was cold and damp and smelled of horses and chimney smoke, and she stood on the pavement for a moment and breathed it in. Then she got back in the carriage and went home. Her mother was in the morning room when she returned, sitting with her back very straight and her hands folded in her lap, the posture of a woman who has been waiting and has decided to use the waiting time to construct a position. "You went out," Lady Ashcombe said. "Yes." "Where?" Eleanor removed her coat and handed it to Agnes, who had the excellent judgment to immediately leave the room. "To see Hartwell." Her mother was quiet for a long moment. "Without speaking to your father?" "Yes." "Eleanor." Lady Ashcombe's voice had that quality it got when she was attempting to remain composed while feeling the opposite. "I understand that you are in pain. What you experienced was deeply unjust. But this is not the way acting alone, making legal inquiries without the family. The family," Eleanor said, sitting down across from her mother, "was prepared to advise me to continue with the wedding. We were prepared to discuss all possible—" "Mother." Eleanor's voice was quiet, exact, and did not waver. "Julian Cresswell was conducting a private arrangement with another woman for 5 months. I have documentation, 7 letters, a witness, a timeline that begins 2 months after he proposed to me." She looked at her mother steadily. "There is no version of those facts that leads to a quiet continuation. The only question is whether this family presents those facts or allows Julian's family to present their version first." Lady Ashcombe had gone very still. "Documentation," she said. "Yes." "From whom?" Eleanor held her mother's gaze. "From someone with every reason to be accurate." A long silence. Her mother looked at her daughter, really looked at her the way Eleanor had not seen her look in a long time, without the social calculus and the tactical assessment. Just the raw maternal attention of a woman seeing something in her child that she had not expected. "Tell me what you need from your father," Lady Ashcombe said finally. Something in Eleanor's chest eased. "His signature on a formal instruction to Hartwell. and his agreement not to respond to any further communication from the Cresswell solicitor until I give him the complete picture. Her mother rose from her chair, smoothed her skirts, and walked to the door. She stopped with her hand on the frame. "Your father," she said without turning, "has always said you were the most capable person in this house." She paused. I thought he meant it as a compliment. I understand now he meant it as a fact. She left. Eleanor sat alone in the morning room for a moment, the fire ticking beside her. Then she picked up the leather portfolio and went back to the writing table. The twist when it came from the direction Eleanor had not been watching. She had been watching Julian. She had been watching his solicitor's letters, tracking his attempts to reframe the story, measuring his next move. She had expected that the threat would come from him, from his family's influence, from the careful campaign of social whispering that aristocratic families conducted when they needed to control a narrative. She had not, in the concentrated focus of those first days, given enough attention to Cecily. That was her error. Not a fatal one, but an instructive one. She learned of it from Adrian. His message arrived late Thursday afternoon, carried by his personal footman, rather than the post which told her before she opened it that something had changed quickly. Eleanor Cecily called at Ravensmere this morning without prior notice. She was received by my housekeeper and waited 40 minutes before I agreed to see her. I am writing to tell you what she said because it affects you directly and because you have a right to know before I respond. She told me that what occurred at Madame Rouchard's was a misunderstanding, that Julian had initiated the encounter, and she had been attempting to rebuff him when you arrived. She further stated that your account of events was colored by long-standing jealousy of her position in society, and that Lady Eleanor Ashcombe had harbored a grievance against her for some time prior to April the 14th. She asked me to reconsider the engagement. I did not respond to any of this. I told her to leave. I am telling you now, because you should understand what she is attempting before she takes it further. Adrian. Eleanor read the letter once carefully, and then held it in her hands and breathed. Jealousy. Cecily had walked into Ravensmere House and claimed that Eleanor had invented what she witnessed out of jealousy. She had not panicked. She had not crumbled. She had walked into the lion's den and attempted to rewrite the entire event from the ground up, betting that Adrian's pride or his desire to be free of scandal or some residual attachment would make him want to believe a version of events that cost him nothing. Eleanor set the letter down. She thought about that for a long time. Then she wrote back, Adrian, thank you for telling me. Cecily is not desperate. She is strategic. She went to you because she calculated that a duke with options would prefer a convenient explanation to a damaging truth. She has not made that calculation incorrectly in the past. It is almost certainly how she has managed situations before. What she has miscalculated is that you already have the agent's report. She doesn't know the letters exist. She is building a defense against a case she doesn't know has already been assembled. Don't tell her. Don't respond to anything she sends. And if she comes again, I would like to be there. Eleanor. She sealed it, sent it. She sat back in her chair. If Cecily was moving this quickly, it meant she was afraid. And a woman that calculated moving that fast out of fear was going to do something else. Something larger. Eleanor did not know yet what it would be. She knew it was coming. She began to think about what she needed in place before it arrived. What came next was not Cecily. It was Julian. He appeared at Ashcombe House on Friday morning without an appointment, which was either genuine desperation or a deliberate attempt to catch Eleanor unprepared. She suspected the latter, but desperation and strategy had begun to look very similar in Julian Cresswell, and she had stopped trying to distinguish between them. How was shown to the drawing room. Eleanor came down after 10 minutes, long enough to be deliberate, not long enough to seem afraid. Agnes stood outside the door. Julian was standing when she entered. He had the look of a man who had not slept, which might have moved her once. It did not move her now. Eleanor. His voice was low, urgent. Please, just hear me out. She sat down in the chair nearest the door. She did not invite him to sit. He sat anyway. What I did was wrong, he said. I know that. I am not here to pretend otherwise. That's a change from your solicitor's letters, she said. a flicker of discomfort. The letters were ill-advised. My father's idea. He thought a legal framing would be more... He stopped. That's not the point. Eleanor, what happened between me and Cecily, it was not what you think. It wasn't... Don't. Her voice was even. Don't tell me what I think. I'm not in love with her. I know you're not, she said. That's not the part that matters. He blinked. Then what? You were never going to tell me. She looked at him steadily. If I hadn't walked through that door, you would have married me in 3 weeks and continued. Not because of love, because it suited you. Because I was useful and reliable, and I had told you every way a woman can tell a man that she trusted him completely, and you calculated that the trust would hold. She paused. That's not a man who made a mistake. That's a man who made a decision. Julian's jaw worked. You make it sound, I make it sound like what it was. I was going to end things with her. He said the words coming out faster now, the desperation rising through the performance of composure. Before the wedding, I had decided. What you saw was it was a farewell. I was telling her it had to stop. Eleanor looked at him. She thought about 7 letters, 5 months, November to March. Julian, she said, I have read the things you write when you mean something. I know the difference between your words when you believe them and your words when you're hoping I will. She stood up. This is not a conversation I intend to continue. My solicitor is in communication with yours. Any further discussion should go through them. She moved toward the door, then stopped, turned back. One thing. He looked at her with the expression of a man reaching for a rope. When you decided it had to stop, she said, did you mean it had to stop because it was wrong, or because you'd been caught? The silence was its own answer. She walked out. That afternoon, Agnes found Eleanor in the library, sitting very still with a book open on her lap that she had not been reading. She had been listening to the afternoon settle around her and trying to locate the bottom of what she was feeling. Not anger, though there was some. Not grief, though that was there too. The residue of it. The low-grade ache of having arranged yourself around a future that has been taken apart and stored in pieces around a room you no longer recognize. What she was mostly feeling, she decided, was tired. Tired in the specific way of a woman who has spent years performing certainty she did not have and has finally, at significant cost, been released from the performance. She did not want to perform anything else for a while. Mr. Hartwell sent round, Agnes said from the door. She held out a small envelope. Eleanor set down the book, took the envelope and opened it. The letter from Hartwell was 2 paragraphs, formal and careful, and what it contained changed the shape of the next several weeks entirely. He had been contacted, he wrote, by the Cresswell family solicitor that morning. The communication had not been addressed to Eleanor's father as previous correspondence had been. It had been addressed to Hartwell himself without the family's knowledge, and it contained a proposal, a mutual dissolution of the engagement, framed as an amicable separation by both parties with no fault assigned to either side. No fault assigned to either side. In exchange, the Cresswell family would waive the penalty clause. The penalty clause that was, Hartwell noted, the only financial recourse the Ashcombe family had in this situation. Eleanor read it twice. She understood what was being offered. Julian's family was willing to let her go quietly and take no money, which sounded generous until you realized what they were actually purchasing with that concession, her silence. A mutual dissolution with no fault assigned meant Eleanor could not, without contradicting the legal settlement she had signed publicly, attribute the end of the engagement to Julian's conduct. She would be free, and gagged. She put the letter in the portfolio. She wrote to Hartwell in 4 sentences. She declined the proposal. She required that the penalty clause remain fully in force, and she would provide within 7 days the documentation necessary to establish Lord Cresswell's breach of conduct as the precipitating cause of the dissolution. She sent the letter. Then she wrote to Adrian, I need the full agent's report, not the preliminary everything, and I need it as a formal affidavit witnessed and notarized. They have offered to waive the penalty clause in exchange for a mutual dissolution with no fault assigned. They are trying to buy my silence. I want to make certain that what they have done cannot be quietly paid for. Can you do this, Eleanor? She waited. His reply came at 8 that evening. The affidavit will be ready by Monday morning. My man will also provide the names of 2 individuals who carried messages between Cresswell and Cecily. Both are prepared to make statements if required. One of them is a former member of Cecily's household staff. She left Cecily's employ in February. She left because she was asked to carry a letter she found the contents of deeply troubling. She kept a copy. Adrian. Eleanor set the letter down. She sat very still. A former household staff member. A woman who had worked for Cecily, been asked to carry messages she found troubling, kept a copy of one of those messages, and then left the household. That woman had been living for 2 months with that knowledge and no one to give it to. Eleanor wrote back immediately. Find out her name. I would like to speak to her myself, not through an intermediary, if she is willing. Eleanor. Then she sat back and did something she had not done in a long time. She planned. Not from fear. Not from hurt. From the clear-headed, unsentimental intelligence of a woman who had finally stopped waiting for someone else to determine what she deserved and had decided to determine it herself. The woman's name was Martha Greer. She was 31 years old, had worked for the Marwood household for 6 years, and had left in February of that year without a formal reference, which in Victorian London was a significant professional sacrifice. Eleanor met her at a small hotel near King's Cross, accompanied only by Agnes on a grey Saturday morning when the streets were quiet and the hotel's small parlor was empty, except for the 2 of them and a maid who brought tea and departed. Martha Greer had the particular bearing of a woman who has carried something heavy for a long time and is not entirely sure she is permitted to set it down. She sat across from Eleanor with her hands in her lap and her eyes very steady. Not afraid, Eleanor thought. Simply careful. The carefulness of someone who has learned that information can be dangerous. I want you to understand, Eleanor said, that nothing you tell me today will be used in any way that puts you in difficulty. I am not asking you to do anything that might expose you to retribution from Lady Cecily or her family. She paused. I am asking you to tell me the truth. And I am asking because I believe you left your position at considerable personal cost in order to avoid participating in something you felt was wrong. If I am mistaken about that, tell me. Martha Greer looked at her for a long moment. You're not mistaken, she said. The story came out steadily. Piece by piece, the way a woman tells a thing she has been holding at arm's length. Not dramatically, not with tears, but with the clipped precision of someone who wants to be accurate and is choosing each word for its truth value rather than its effect. She had been asked beginning in December to carry written notes to a particular address in Bloomsbury. She was told the notes were related to a charity arrangement of Lady Cecily's, that the man at the Bloomsbury address was a donor the family dealt with indirectly for reasons of discretion. In January, she had carried a letter sealed with red wax and had been told explicitly not to wait for a reply. She had waited anyway, habit or caution, or some instinct she couldn't name. The reply had come out while she was still in the street. She had carried it back. And in transit crossing through a crowd near Oxford Street, where the streets were noisy and no one was watching, she had opened it. She had read enough to understand what the correspondence was. She had resealed it. She had delivered it. She had gone home that night and written out from memory what she had read word for word before the precision of it faded. She kept that copy in a small book she had bought at a market stall, a plain green notebook that she had hidden in the lining of the winter coat she no longer wore. She had left Cecily's employ in February when she had been asked to deliver a 3rd letter. This one she knew from the address, and the handwriting was not going to Bloomsbury. It was going to Julian Cresswell's club. I could have carried it, Martha said. I've told myself 100 times I should have just delivered it and kept my head down. It wasn't my business. She looked at Eleanor. But it was someone's business. Someone was about to marry him, and I didn't know who she was. I just knew she didn't know. Eleanor held Martha's gaze for a moment. She was me, Eleanor said. Martha Greer did not look surprised. I thought it might be. When the Duke's man came to find me, I thought it might be. The letter you copied, Eleanor said carefully. What did it say? Martha reached into her coat. The notebook was small and green exactly as she'd described. She opened it to a page marked with a folded corner and set it on the table between them. Eleanor picked it up and read. The handwriting was Julian's. She recognized it in the first 3 words and felt nothing particular, no shock, not anymore. Only the cold and clarifying attention of a woman reading a document she needs to fully understand. The letter was not long, 5 sentences. But those 5 sentences established with the completeness of a window opened onto a room you thought was empty, that Julian Cresswell had not stumbled into a reckless affair. He had sustained it deliberately, with full knowledge of what he was doing, and with the explicit plan to continue after both marriages had taken place. He had not intended to end it. He had never intended to end it. Eleanor set the notebook down. She looked at Martha Greer across the small table in the quiet hotel parlor, with the gray morning light coming through the window and the tea going cold between them. "I'd like to have a copy of this made," she said, "with your permission. And I'd like to ask whether you would be willing to provide a written statement to a solicitor, not to a court, not publicly, but as a formal record that can be used if Lord Cresswell disputes the authenticity of the documentation." Martha Greer straightened slightly. "I already left a position without a reference to avoid being part of this," she said. "I'm not going to flinch now." "You'll need a reference for your next position," Eleanor said. "If it would not embarrass you, mine would be available." Something moved across Martha Greer's face, not quite surprise and not quite relief, but some compound of the two that showed in the steadying of her shoulders. "That would be—" She stopped, cleared her throat. "Yes, thank you." Eleanor took the notebook. Agnes, who had been silent in the corner, was already prepared with paper and ink. They stayed another hour. That evening, Eleanor sat in her father's study with her father on one side of the desk, and Hartwell on the other, and she laid out everything. The timeline, the agent's report, the letters, the financial clause Cecily had attempted to embed in the Ravensmere settlement, Martha Greer's statement and the copied letter, the Cresswell solicitor's offer of a mutual dissolution with no fault assigned. She laid it all out in sequence quietly without drama, the way her father had taught her to present a case. When she finished, her father was silent for a long moment. Lord Ashcombe was not a man who displayed emotion easily. He had the reserved precision of an older generation of English gentlemen who considered a well-reasoned argument the highest form of personal expression. But Eleanor watched something move through him as she finished a tightening around the jaw, a set to his shoulders, that she recognized as anger being held very carefully in place. "The letter," he said finally. "The copied letter. Julian's, confirmed by the handwriting, and the woman who copied it is prepared to swear to the circumstances of its copying. Yes." Lord Ashcombe looked at Hartwell. Hartwell, for his part, had the expression of a man who has just watched a very careful case assembled by someone he had not expected to assemble one, and is adjusting his professional assessment accordingly. "The penalty clause," Lord Ashcombe said. "Fully enforceable," Hartwell said. "Given the documented conduct, there is no credible argument for mutual dissolution. The breach is Lord Cresswell's." Lord Ashcombe nodded once. He looked at his daughter. "You did all of this," he said, not a question. "Yes." "In 11 days?" "Yes." Another silence. He looked down at the documents arranged on his desk and then back at her, and in his expression was something she had not seen often, a particular kind of attention that her father reserved for things he found genuinely remarkable. "I should have been the one to protect you," he said. The words were simple, and they landed quietly, and Eleanor felt them in her chest, the way you feel things that come too late to be of practical use, but are still somehow worth having. "You taught me how to protect myself," she said. That was enough. Lord Ashcombe turned to Hartwell. "Proceed as my daughter instructs. She has the complete authority of this family in this matter." Hartwell gathered the documents with the air of a man who has been given a complex piece of work and is quietly looking forward to it. When he had gone, Eleanor sat alone with her father in the study that smelled of pipe smoke and old books, and neither of them spoke for a moment, which was its own kind of conversation. "The Duke of Ravensmere," her father said finally. "He provided the agent's report." "Yes." "He is also dissolving his engagement." "Yes." Lord Ashcombe considered this. He could have handled this entirely separately from us. His resources are considerably larger. He had no obligation to involve you or to share what he found." "No," Eleanor said. "He didn't." Her father looked at her with an expression she could not quite read. "Is he a good man?" Eleanor thought about 7 letters and an unsigned note, and the words, "The decision remains yours," and a man crouching on a staircase, not to comfort her, but to determine what was actually wrong before deciding what to do about it. "I don't know yet," she said, "but I think he might be." Her father nodded slowly. "That's an honest answer." Eleanor rose and kissed him on the forehead, something she had not done since she was much younger, and went upstairs to her room. She did not take the leather portfolio with her. She left it on her father's desk open with everything inside it organized in the order it would need to be presented. She had done what she came to do. Now she needed to think about what came next. Not the legal proceedings, not Hartwell's careful letters, but the larger and more uncertain question of what she was building toward. Not revenge. She was clear on that. Revenge required the other person to still hold a piece of you, and Julian Cresswell no longer held any piece of Eleanor Ashcombe that she was aware of. What she wanted was simpler and harder to name. She wanted the record to be accurate. She wanted it to be known, not shouted in drawing rooms, not whispered over tea, but formally known in the way that only documented truth achieves, that what had been done was done, and that she had seen it and had not been persuaded that she hadn't. She wanted in the quietest and most essential part of herself to have been believed. Not by Julian, not by society, not even necessarily by Adrian, by herself. That part was already done. Everything else was simply the work. Hartwell delivered the formal notice to the Cresswell family solicitor on Monday morning. By Monday afternoon, Julian knew. Eleanor did not witness the moment. She did not need to. She understood it from the letter that arrived at Ashcombe House at 4:30. Not from Julian this time, but from his father, Lord Cresswell Sr., addressed to her father in the language of men who have spent their lives controlling situations and have just discovered that one has moved outside their reach. The letter was 3 paragraphs of carefully constructed outrage. It called the formal notice premature. It called the documentation in question. It called Eleanor's conduct unbecoming of a woman of her family's standing. And in the 3rd paragraph, which Lord Ashcombe read aloud to Eleanor in his study, while Hartwell sat to one side with his hands folded, it warned that should the Ashcombe family persist in this course of action, the Cresswells would be compelled to provide their own account of events to the relevant parties. Lord Ashcombe set the letter down. "Relevant parties," he said. "Society editors," Hartwell said. "Club acquaintances, possibly the press." "They're going to move first," Eleanor said. Both men looked at her. "If they release their version before ours is established," she said, "then our documentation becomes a response rather than a revelation. We become the family defending ourselves instead of the family presenting facts. The sequence matters." Her father looked at Hartwell. "How quickly can you formally file the dissolution with breach of conduct cited?" Eleanor asked. 2 days, perhaps less if I prioritize it." Hartwell gathered his papers without further discussion. After he left, her father poured 2 glasses of claret, set one in front of Eleanor, and did not say anything for a long moment. "They are going to make this unpleasant," he said finally. "Yes." "Are you prepared for that?" Eleanor picked up the glass. "I have been preparing for the past 11 days. Lord Ashcombe looked at her with the expression of a man who is still learning the dimensions of someone he has known all her life. "I believe you have," he said. The unpleasantness began on Tuesday. It started the way these things always started in London society, not with a declaration, but with a silence, a small and pointed withdrawal. Mrs. Fawcett, who had been a consistent presence at Lady Ashcombe's morning calls for 11 years, sent a note that she was indisposed. Lady Portsmouth, whose daughter had been at school with Eleanor, declined an invitation to tea that she had accepted only the week before. The calls stopped. The notes thinned. Eleanor noticed. She was supposed to notice. That was the point. She was in the upstairs sitting room with Charlotte when Agnes brought her the third declined invitation in 2 days, and Charlotte looked up from her embroidery with the expression of a girl of 19 who is old enough to understand what is happening, but young enough to still be frightened by it. "They're listening to the Cresswells," Charlotte said. "Yes." "What are they saying about you?" Eleanor thought about Lord Cresswell's letter. Unbecoming of a woman of her family's standing. Nothing specific yet. Enough to make people cautious. Caution is all they need right now. It isolates us without requiring anyone to commit to a position. Charlotte set down her embroidery. "That's vicious." "It's effective," Eleanor said, "which is why we need to be faster." She went to her desk and wrote to Adrian. "The Cresswells have begun a quiet campaign. Withdrawn invitations, declined calls. Nothing public yet, but it will be. Hartwell is filing within 2 days. I need to know where your public statement stands. Timing matters now. If you announce your dissolution before the filing is complete, it pulls focus. If it comes after, it confirms the pattern. We need to coordinate." Eleanor. The reply came that evening. "I was going to announce tomorrow. I have held it because I wanted to speak to you first, which I should have done before drafting the language. I'll send you what I've written. Tell me if anything needs to change. Adrian." The draft arrived within the hour. Eleanor read it at her writing table with Agnes holding the lamp. It was precise, formal, and exactly 3 sentences. It announced the dissolution of his engagement to Lady Cecily Marwood, cited irreconcilable differences in fundamental conduct and character, and expressed the Duke's intention to make no further public comment on the matter. It did not mention Eleanor's name. It did not mention Julian. It was in its restraint more devastating than an accusation, because anyone in society who had heard even a fragment of what was circulating would read between those 3 sentences and understand exactly what irreconcilable differences in fundamental conduct and character meant when said by a man of Adrian's standing and precision. She wrote back, "The language is right. Don't change a word. Release it Thursday, 1 day after Hartwell files. The sequence will be clear." His reply was 2 words, agreed. Thursday. Wednesday, Hartwell filed. Thursday morning, the notice appeared in the Ravensmere solicitor's formal communications to the relevant parties, and by Thursday afternoon, the Duke of Ravensmere's announcement had been seen by everyone who mattered in London. Eleanor spent Thursday at home. She did not go out. Not because she was hiding. She was very clear with herself on that distinction, but because she had learned from her father that the most effective thing you could do in the hours after a significant move was nothing. Let it land. Let people read it. Let the silence do its work before you added anything to it. Charlotte brought her a note at 3 o'clock. "From Lady Sinclair," Charlotte said with an expression that suggested she'd expected the sender to be hostile and was not sure what to make of the note's actual contents. Lady Sinclair was 64 years old, had been widowed twice, had survived 2 separate family scandals and 1 financial disaster, and was considered by many in London society to be the closest thing to a final court of appeal that did not involve an actual judge. Her opinion once formed was rarely revised. Her allegiance once extended was rarely withdrawn. Her note to Eleanor was 4 lines. "My dear Lady Eleanor, I have read the morning's communications with considerable interest, and I find myself in possession of a view which I do not often extend, without sufficient cause, I believe you. I would be glad to receive you for tea on Saturday if you are at liberty. Yours E. Sinclair." Eleanor read it twice. Then she passed it to Charlotte and watched her sister's face. Charlotte read it and looked up. "Lady Sinclair." "Yes." "She never—" "No," Eleanor said. "She doesn't." She wrote back immediately, "I should be delighted to come on Saturday. Thank you. E. Ashcombe." She set the pen down. Lady Sinclair's tea was not simply tea. It was, in the language of London society, a statement. An appearance there after everything that had been published would tell every drawing room in the city that Eleanor Ashcombe had not been disgraced, that she had been wronged, and that at least one person of unimpeachable social authority had read the situation clearly and chosen her side accordingly. Eleanor had not orchestrated this. It had come on its own. But she understood its weight, and she did not intend to waste it. What she had not anticipated was Julian. She should have. She recognized this afterward. She had been so focused on the legal proceedings, on Cecily's strategic maneuvering, on the careful sequencing of public moves, that she had underestimated the thing Julian was most capable of when his back was against a wall. Julian was charming. And charm deployed in desperation was a weapon she had not fully accounted for. On Friday evening at the Pemberton dinner, a standing engagement she had not cancelled, because cancelling it would have been read as retreat. Eleanor was seated near the far end of the table when the footman informed their host quietly that an additional guest had arrived. She did not hear this. She was in conversation with Colonel Hartley's wife about a charity event and paying no particular attention to the door. She became aware of Julian's presence, the way you become aware of cold air, not from one clear signal, but from the composite of small ones. A shift in the room's noise level. Someone looking past her. The particular quality of attention that fills a space when something unexpected has entered it. She turned. Julian was across the room speaking with their host, and his expression was composed and pleasant, and nothing in his posture or his manner suggested that there was a single document in Hartwell's office that pertained to him. He looked exactly like a man attending a dinner. He was watching her. She turned back to Mrs. Hartley and continued the conversation about the charity event without missing a sentence. She was aware of him moving through the room. She was aware of him accepting a glass. She was aware with the particular peripheral precision of a woman who has trained herself not to show what she is feeling. Of the moment, he began to work the room, speaking to this person, inclining toward that one, the low laugh, the well-timed pause. He was repairing himself, socially, in real time, in the same room. She had 20 minutes before the dinner moved to the table, and she understood that if she spent those 20 minutes appearing to avoid him, she would look afraid. And if she spent them appearing to ignore him with too much deliberateness, she would look brittle. What she needed to look like was what she actually was, a woman who had made her decisions and had nothing to justify to anyone in this room. She excused herself from Mrs. Hartley, accepted a glass of water from a passing footman, and moved with steady purpose toward the small cluster of people nearest the window. 3 women she knew well, whose company would be both comfortable and visible. She did not make it. Julian stepped into her path. Not dramatically, naturally, the way you step into a conversation, and his voice was low, and his expression was everything she remembered finding attractive before she understood what it was. Eleanor. He said her name like a hand extended. Julian. She stopped. She did not take a step back. She did not look away. You should know that your presence here changes nothing. I'm not here to change anything. His voice was even. I'm here because I was invited, and because I am not prepared to disappear from London society, because you have decided. I have not decided anything, she said. I have documented something. There is a difference. A flicker behind his eyes. You've weaponized a private matter. You made a private matter public the moment you chose to conduct it during an engagement to me. Her voice was perfectly level, not loud, not heated. I didn't create this situation, Julian. I responded to it, with evidence, professionally and legally. If the result is uncomfortable for you, I'd ask you to consider carefully who made the choices that led here. He looked at her for a long moment. There was something in his face she hadn't expected, not anger, not the desperation of his recent letters, but something older and more complicated. Something that might, in a man capable of more honest self-examination, have been recognized as shame. He was not, she understood now, a bad man exactly. He was a weak one, which was in some ways worse. I did love you, he said very quietly. I know, she said. Not enough, but some. And I believed it when it was there. She stepped past him and joined the group at the window. She did not look back. Saturday morning brought Lady Sinclair's tea, and with it the first full breath Eleanor had drawn in 3 weeks. Lady Sinclair's house was warm and cluttered in the way of women who have lived fully and kept evidence of it. Books with broken spines, a piano that showed signs of actual use, a small dog who inspected Eleanor once and then settled on the rug as though she had passed a test. Lady Sinclair herself was small and sharp-eyed, and moved through her own house with the authority of someone who has decided at some point long ago exactly what she thinks about most things, and has found that being correct is more efficient than being diplomatic. "Sit," she said, and Eleanor sat. Tea was poured. The dog relocated. Lady Sinclair fixed Eleanor with the attention of someone who intends to actually see you, rather than the version of you that has been circulating in drawing rooms. "You went to Hartwell yourself," Lady Sinclair said. "Before your father." Eleanor did not ask how she knew. Lady Sinclair knew things. It was simply a quality she possessed. Yes. Good. Most women would have waited. Waiting in a situation like this hands the advantage to the person who acted first. A small pause. "You didn't wait." "No." "And the Duke of Ravensmere, you've spoken with him." "We've corresponded, and met once." "Is he decent?" The question was so direct, it almost startled a real answer out of her before she could shape it. Eleanor considered for a moment. "He is honest," she said. "He does not manage people. He informs them and lets them decide. I find that unusual in a man of his position." Lady Sinclair looked at her for a moment with an expression Eleanor couldn't quite read. "It is unusual," she said. "In a man of any position." She set down her cup. "What are you going to do now?" "Continue the legal process. Allow the filing to do its work." "Legally, yes. Socially." Eleanor was quiet for a beat. "I hadn't decided." "Then I'll suggest something." Lady Sinclair folded her hands in her lap with the manner of a woman who has been suggesting things to people for 64 years and has refined the practice considerably. "You should be seen, not performing recovery, not demonstrating resilience for an audience. Simply seen living, functioning, engaged. There are 3 events in the next fortnight at which your presence will be noted. I will attend all 3. If you are there, I will speak to you publicly and at length. Anyone watching will understand what that means." Eleanor held her gaze. "You would do that?" "I am doing it," Lady Sinclair said with mild impatience. "I just told you." Eleanor looked at her, this small, sharp woman, who had survived everything London had ever brought to bear on her, and had come out the other side with her opinions intact, and her posture unbowed, and felt something she had not expected, gratitude so clear, it almost hurt. "Thank you," Eleanor said. "Don't thank me." Lady Sinclair picked up her cup. "I'm not doing it for kindness. I'm doing it because you are right, and they are wrong, and I have lived long enough to find it tiresome when the wrong people win." She took a sip. "Finish your tea." What happened on Sunday broke open everything that had seemed for 2 careful days to be stabilizing. It came through Agnes, who had it from the Ravensmere house footman, who had it from the butler, which meant it had traveled 3 removes in under an hour, the speed of information that is too alarming to sit quietly. Adrian had been approached the previous evening at his club by Julian Cresswell. Not privately. At the club in the main room with witnesses. Julian had walked up to Adrian with the deliberate visibility of a man who has decided that if he is going down, he intends to take the shape of the fall with him. He had said in a voice calibrated to be heard without appearing to perform for the room, that he found it remarkable that the Duke of Ravensmere, who had always been considered a man of honor, had chosen to act as an instrument of a young woman's vendetta against a man whose only crime was falling short of the ideal she had constructed for him. He had said that the dissolution of 2 engagements within the same week was a remarkable coincidence. He had said that a man with Adrian's resources choosing at this particular moment to involve himself in Lady Eleanor Ashcombe's legal proceedings was not acting from disinterest. He had implied, not stated, implied precisely enough that it could not be formally attributed that Adrian had personal reasons for wanting Julian Cresswell out of Eleanor's life. Then he had walked away. Agnes delivered all of this to Eleanor in a rapid, careful summary, and stood at the door waiting. Eleanor sat very still for 30 seconds. Then she stood, went to her desk, and wrote to Adrian in 3 sentences. "I heard what happened last night. I need to speak to you today, not by letter. Tell me when you are free, and I will come to Ravensmere House. Eleanor." His reply arrived in 40 minutes. "Now if you can. Adrian." She found him in the study, standing rather than sitting, which was the first indicator that whatever composure he was presenting in the room was costing him more than usual. He looked at her when she came in with the direct assessing gaze. She had grown accustomed to the look of a man who is always determining what is actually the matter before deciding what to do about it. "You've heard," he said. "Everything." He did not ask her how. He moved to the chair across from his desk and sat. And she sat. And he said, "Julian Cresswell is not a stupid man." "No," she agreed. "He's not. What he did last night was surgical. He introduced the idea publicly in a place where it would circulate that my involvement in this is not neutral, that I have a personal interest." He looked at her steadily. "If that idea takes hold, our documentation becomes tainted. The story becomes not two people wronged by a shared betrayal, but a powerful duke assisting a woman he is romantically pursuing at the expense of another man. It also makes me look like your instrument rather than an independent party," Eleanor said. "Yes. Which was precisely what I worked to avoid from the beginning." "I know." She held his gaze. "Did you anticipate this?" A pause not evasive, she thought. More like a man making a fair accounting of his own failures. "I anticipated Julian would try something. I did not anticipate this particular approach. I should have." He looked at the desk. "I know his social circles. I should have known he would use the club as a stage." "Why didn't you tell me you were going to be there last night?" "I didn't expect him to be there. It was a routine evening." "And after he spoke to you?" A longer pause this time. "I chose not to respond in the moment. I calculated that any response I gave would be taken as confirmation that he had drawn blood." He looked at her. "That calculation may have been wrong." Eleanor looked at this controlled, precise man who had spent 35 years operating on the assumption that the right move was always the carefully reasoned one, and was now learning in real time that some moments required something different from careful. "It wasn't wrong," she said. "Responding in the room would have been worse, but not telling me within the hour that was wrong." He held her gaze without looking away. Yes, it was. The directness of that disarmed her slightly. She had been prepared to argue the point. "What do we do now?" she asked. Howe was quiet for a moment. Then, "Julian has introduced a narrative. The only thing that counters a narrative is a stronger one, established faster through a more credible source." He paused. "Lady Sinclair had tea with you yesterday. You know about that. London is a small city for people of a certain kind." He looked at her. "If she is willing to speak not to print, but in rooms, it changes the frame. A woman of her credibility, stating clearly that she finds the conduct of the Cresswell and Marwood parties indefensible, and Lady Ashcomb's response, measured and correct, that doesn't fight Julian's narrative. It replaces it. She's already offered to be seen with me publicly at 3 events. Something moved through his expression, not surprise exactly, but a recalibration. "You arranged that before today." "Yesterday." A long pause. He looked at her with an expression that was harder to read than his usual steadiness. Something attentive in it. Something that went beyond the assessment of a situation and touched the edges of something more personal. "You are always 3 steps ahead," he said. It was not a compliment exactly. It was the observation of a man who has genuinely noticed something and finds it worth naming. "I've had to be," she said. "Women who aren't, don't survive these situations with anything intact." He was quiet for a moment after that, genuinely quiet. Not the pause before speaking kind, but the kind that means something has landed and is being absorbed. "I want to ask you something," he said, "and I'd like an honest answer." "I generally give those. Do you want me to step back from this? From the visible coordination, Julian's implication, however false, is doing damage because it has a shape people can recognize. If I am less publicly involved, the shape disappears. You have Hartwell. You have Lady Sinclair. You have the documentation. You may not need Adrian." She said his name the way you stop someone from completing a sentence that's going in the wrong direction. "He made that accusation because he saw that our coordination was working. If you withdraw now, it looks like the accusation was accurate. It looks like you were embarrassed by it." He looked at her. "And more importantly," she said, He made that accusation to separate us, to make us make a tactical error while reacting to his narrative instead of advancing ours. She held his gaze. Don't react to him. That's what he wants. A long pause. You're right, he said. I know I am. Something crossed his face that was, she was fairly certain, the closest thing to a smile she had seen on him since the staircase. There is one more thing, he said, and his voice changed slightly, not softer, but more careful, with the care of a man handling something that could break if he's not precise. Cecily, it was not long. It was not particularly dramatic. In fact, read quickly, it might have seemed almost reasonable, an expression of regret, an acknowledgement that her choices had caused pain, a quiet mention that she bore Eleanor no ill will and wished her well. But Eleanor did not read it quickly. She read the third sentence 4 times. I hope Lady Ashcombe understands that there are always 2 sides to a story, and that the particular afternoon at Madame Rouchard's was not, as it may have appeared, entirely unplanned. Eleanor set the letter down. She looked at Adrian. Not entirely unplanned, she said. His face was very still. Yes, I read that too. She knew we would both be there. That is what it implies. She arranged it. Eleanor's voice was precise and quiet. Or she knew it was arranged. She knew Julian would be there. She knew I would be there. She chose that place that day. She was having a final appointment. Was she? Eleanor looked at him steadily. Or did she tell Madame Rouchard she needed an appointment that morning because she knew the Ashcombe appointment was in the afternoon and she wanted to ensure the timing aligned? Adrian was quiet. Why? Eleanor said. Why would she want me to see them? The question sat between them for a long moment. And then Eleanor understood. She understood it the way you understand something that was there all along, waiting for the correct question to make it visible. She wanted out, Eleanor said. Not out of you specifically, out of both arrangements, out of the whole situation. Julian was becoming a liability. His family was pressing her, or she was pressing him, or they'd reached the point where continuing in secret had become more complicated than ending it. But she couldn't be the one to end it. If she broke the engagement with you, she lost the title and the money and the financial security her family needed. If Julian broke his with me, she gained nothing and risked everything. She stopped. But if I discovered them, then both engagements dissolve. Adrian said, his voice flat and exact. And neither she nor Julian formally ended anything. They were discovered. The outcome is the same, but the agency is ours. She used me, Eleanor said. She planned for me to find them. She needed a witness who would react in a way that made concealment impossible. And I... She stopped. Breathed. I walked through that door. The fire in the study ticked. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. She did not predict the affidavit, Adrian said finally. Or the agent's report. Or Hartwell. She predicted that you would be too shocked to do anything but react, and that the dissolution of 2 engagements in scandal would be the whole story. She did not predict that you would turn it into a case. Because she has never met a woman who did, Eleanor said. Another silence. Adrian looked at her. This changes the legal position considerably. If Cecily deliberately orchestrated the circumstances of the discovery, it means it wasn't just Julian's conduct that caused the dissolution. It was a coordinated act. Eleanor's mind was already moving through it. Which means both of them are responsible. Which means the breach of conduct claim applies to both parties. Which means Cecily's family may also be liable, Adrian said. Not just morally, potentially financially. Eleanor stood up. I need to write to Hartwell tonight. I'll have my solicitor contact him in the morning with the letter, as corroborating material. She moved toward the door, then stopped, turned back. She looked at him. This man she had met 17 days ago on a staircase, who had crouched beside her on the floor and sent for her carriage and spoken to her maid, and then instead of absorbing her situation into his own management of it, had set the question back in her hands and waited. She didn't predict you either, Eleanor said. She assumed a duke in your position would want this managed quietly and quickly, that you'd take the fastest exit and move on, That is what most men in my position would do, he said. Why didn't you? The question was genuine. She had been carrying it for 17 days and had not asked it until now. He was quiet for a moment, the real kind of quiet, not the managed kind. Because you told me on that staircase that we had both been deceived, he said. And the way you said it, not as an accusation, not as a plea, but as a statement of fact that you were going to do something about. He looked at her. I have spent my entire adult life being managed and deferred to and agreed with. You did none of those things. In the worst moment I have ever seen you in, you told me the truth. He paused. I have not yet met many people who do that, he said. I did not want to lose access to one. Eleanor looked at him for a moment, with an expression that she was not going to examine too carefully right now. I'll see myself out, she said. And she did. Monday brought Hartwell's response to the new information, which was characteristically concise. This is significant. I will need 2 days to draft the amended filing. Please send Lord Adrian's corroborating materials directly. Do not speak to the press. Eleanor sent a note back. I know. Don't worry. Then she received the letter from Cecily. Not the one Adrian had shown her. Cecily sent one directly to Ashcombe House, addressed to Eleanor personally, in the flowing hand of a woman who had been taught that good penmanship was a form of authority. Eleanor read it at her desk while Agnes stood near the window. It was 2 pages. The first page was a version of an apology, not a real one, but the architectural structure of one, with the emotional language in the right places, and the actual accountability conspicuously absent. Cecily expressed sorrow that events had unfolded as they had. She expressed regret for any pain Eleanor had experienced. She expressed her sincere wish that they might in time achieve some understanding. The second page was where the letter actually lived. On the second page, Cecily wrote that she had always found Eleanor's composure admirable, that she understood the path Eleanor had chosen, and that she hoped Eleanor understood one thing clearly. Cecily had not acted to harm her. She had acted as all women must, to secure her own future in a world that gave women very few instruments with which to do so. She hoped Eleanor could find it in herself to see the situation from that perspective. Then she wrote one final line. I know you found what I left for you to find. I think in your position you might have done the same. Eleanor set the letter down. She sat with it for a full minute. Then she picked up her pen and wrote back 3 sentences, the only response the letter deserved. Lady Cecily. No more, I would not have done the same. That is the entire difference between us. E. Ashcombe. She sealed it, sent it with a footman, and did not think about it again. She was done thinking about Cecily Marwood, not because the anger wasn't there. It was a clean, cold anger, the kind that doesn't flare, but simply holds its temperature. What Cecily had done was not only a betrayal of 2 people, it was a calculated use of Eleanor as a mechanism. She had looked at Eleanor Ashcombe and seen not a person but a tool, a convenient pair of eyes to witness what Cecily needed witnessed. Eleanor had spent enough of her life being useful to people who did not see her. She was finished being useful to this particular one. What she was going to do now was make certain that Cecily's calculation that Eleanor would be too destroyed to function, too socially vulnerable to fight, too bound by the conventions of feminine grief to pursue accountability was the most expensive mistake Cecily Marwood ever made. Wednesday arrived with 3 things at once, which Eleanor would later recognize as the moment the ground shifted for good. The first was Hartwell's amended filing sent to both solicitors and formally lodged, which expanded the breach of conduct claim to include the deliberately orchestrated circumstances of the discovery at Madame Rouchard's. Both Cresswell and Marwood were named. The financial clause remained fully intact. The second was a note from Lady Sinclair, written in her characteristic pointed shorthand. The Ashford drawing rooms are talking. They are talking correctly. Pemberton dinner confirmed it. Thursday still on, I've added Cavendish to the list. Wear something that isn't gray. Eleanor almost smiled. The third was a visit. Not a letter. Not a footman. Lord Julian Cresswell himself at 11 in the morning asking to see Lord Ashcombe. I was not there for Eleanor. He was there, she understood, when Agnes relayed the information and added that he had brought his father's solicitor for a formal meeting. An attempt at negotiated settlement before the amended filing became fully active. Eleanor went to the door of her father's study. She knocked once. Her father opened it. "Julian is here," she said. "I know." He looked at her steadily. "Do you want to be present?" She thought about it for exactly 3 seconds. "No," she said. "I want you to tell him that the filing stands, the penalty clause stands, and that the only conversation I am prepared to have from this point forward goes through Hartwell." She paused. "And I want you to tell him one more thing." Her father waited. "Tell him," she said, "that he had 11 months, that I was patient and loyal and present, that I asked for very little and gave everything I had to give, and that when he needed someone to tell him the truth, the only person who ever did was me." She looked at her father. "He should think about that." Lord Ashcombe looked at his daughter for a long moment. Then he nodded once, closed the study door, and went to deliver the message. Eleanor walked back up the stairs. Behind her, she heard the low rumble of the study door opening of her father's voice, beginning, measured, precise, carrying the full authority of a man who knows exactly what he is protecting and why. She reached the top of the stairs. She stopped. For a moment she simply stood there, one hand on the banister, listening to the quiet of a house that was for the first time in weeks moving in the right direction. She had not won anything yet. She knew that. The filing was in, the documentation was solid, but London society was a long and unpredictable river, and she was still in the middle of it. But for the first time since April the 14th, the current was moving with her. She let go of the banister. She went to her room, changed out of the gray dress into the blue one, and sat down to write 2 letters, one to Hartwell, with a final instruction, and one to Adrian, which she had been composing in her head for 2 days, and was now finally ready to put into words. She began it without salutation. She simply started with what was true. "I have been thinking about what you said about not wanting to lose access to someone who tells the truth. I want you to know that I understand the value of that. I have spent my life surrounded by people who preferred comfortable versions of things. What I found in you in these past weeks is something I did not expect to find in anyone, a person who would rather be accurate than comfortable." She stopped. "Read it back." Added 2 sentences. "I don't know what any of this becomes. I am not yet capable of knowing that. But I wanted to say it before the proceedings move further, and the business of it swallows everything else, that I am glad it was you who was on that staircase." She sealed it. She set it on the tray for Agnes to send. She did not know what he would write back. She did not need to know yet. What she knew was that she had written something true and sent it, and had not second-guessed it, or softened it, or dressed it in the language of propriety. That was enough for today. Tomorrow, there would be more to do. There always was. But today, she had told the truth to a person who deserved to hear it. That was more than she had managed for a very long time. Checking requirements before writing Adrian's reply to her letter arrived Thursday morning. Eleanor was at breakfast with her father when Agnes brought it in on the small silver tray, and she recognized the handwriting before Agnes had finished crossing the room. She took it without changing her expression and placed it beside her plate and continued eating for 3 full minutes before she opened it. Her father noticed. He said nothing. He was a man who understood the value of silence. She broke the seal. She had expected something careful, something measured in the precise, economical language she had come to associate with Adrian, functional, honest, clear in its meaning, without being exposed in its feeling. She had prepared herself for that version, and she had already decided that it would be enough. That it would be more than enough, in fact more than most people had ever given her. What she got was something else entirely. "Eleanor, I read your letter 4 times. Not because I didn't understand it the first time, but because I wanted to be certain I was reading it accurately, and not importing what I hoped it meant into the words that were actually there. I have spent 35 years making decisions about what other people meant based on what was tactically probable rather than what was emotionally true, and I am aware that this has made me on occasion precisely wrong in the ways that matter most. So I read it again, 4 times. You said you are glad it was me on that staircase. I want to tell you something that I have not said to anyone in a very long time, and I am going to say it without managing it, so am I. Not because of what we have accomplished together in these past weeks, though that matters, but because in the course of it, I have come to know a person who does not perform, and does not soften, and does not adjust the truth for the comfort of the room. I did not know I was missing that until I had it. I am reluctant to be without it again. I am not asking you for anything. I recognize you have been asked enough, but I wanted you to know that what you wrote was received exactly as it was intended, and that I am grateful you sent it, rather than deciding it was too much to say. Adrian. Eleanor read it to the end. Then she set it down beside her plate and looked at the window. Her father cleared his throat quietly. Good news. Yes, she said. He did not ask what kind. He returned to his newspaper. She returned to her tea. But she was aware in the warm and complicated center of her chest of something she had not felt in a long time. Not the tentative conditional thing she had called love when she was 24, and placing her whole self in Julian's hands, but something more like recognition. The particular feeling of being accurately seen by someone who has chosen to look carefully and is not looking away. She folded the letter, put it in the inside pocket of her morning dress. She had a great deal of work to do today, and she intended to do all of it well. Hartwell's office sent notice at 10 o'clock that the Cresswell family had requested a formal mediation meeting before the amended filing's consequences took full effect. Hartwell recommended she attend with her father and allow him to present. Eleanor wrote back, attend. Present everything. Do not negotiate the penalty clause. EA. She did not go herself. Not because she was afraid to. She had been in that office twice already and had no apprehension about returning. But because her presence at a negotiation Hartwell was capable of conducting would signal anxiety, and she had none to spare. She went instead to the dressmaker, not Madame Rouchard's, a different one on a different street, and stood for 40 minutes in a fitting for the gown she intended to wear to the Cavendish reception that evening. Lady Sinclair had specified it. Eleanor had added one thing to Lady Sinclair's specification. The gown was not gray. It was deep green, the color of the library at Ashcombe Manor, a color she had always felt steadied by. She was being fitted when Agnes appeared in the doorway, with the expression that meant something had arrived. From Hartwell, Agnes said. Eleanor stepped off the fitting platform, took the note, and read it standing. Hartwell's handwriting was cramped but legible. The Cresswell family solicitor had arrived at the meeting with a proposal. The proposal was superficially a settlement, a reduced penalty payment, formal acknowledgement of breach of conduct by Lord Julian Cresswell, and a mutual agreement to make no further public statements about the events of April the 14th. The addendum at the bottom of Hartwell's note was where it became interesting. The Cresswell solicitor made apparently without prior agreement from his client. One additional disclosure. He stated that the Cresswell family had been approached prior to Lord Julian's engagement to you by a representative of the Marwood family. The approach was a proposal that Julian Cresswell be introduced to Lady Eleanor Ashcombe as a suitable match. The proposal came with the recommendation that Lady Ashcombe was both well-connected and temperamentally unlikely to cause difficulty if the engagement needed to be managed later. The implication being that she was chosen in part for that quality. Hartwell. Eleanor read this paragraph twice. She stood very still in the middle of the dressmaker's workroom with the green gown half-pinned at the shoulder and the city moving outside and the seamstress looking at her with careful professional neutrality. She had been chosen, not because Julian loved her, not even because she was particularly suitable. She had been chosen at Cecily Marwood's indirect instigation, because someone had calculated that Eleanor Ashcombe was the kind of woman who would not cause difficulty. She had been selected for her patience, her compliance, her willingness to smooth things over and keep the peace and not look too hard at the things that needed looking at. She had been picked, in other words, as the perfect woman to deceive. She handed the note back to Agnes. "Tell the carriage to wait," she said. "I'll need an extra hour." She stepped back onto the fitting platform. "The shoulder seam," she said to the seamstress. "Take it in half an inch. I want it to sit perfectly." The seamstress nodded and went to work. Eleanor stood straight and looked at the mirror and let the information settle through her until it reached the place where she kept the things that had been done to her, and she took the measure of it clearly and without flinching, and then she filed it exactly where it belonged, behind the penalty clause, behind Hartwell's amended filing, behind Martha Greer's signed statement, and 7 confirmed letters. It was one more piece of evidence. She intended to use it. The Cavendish reception was the kind of London evening that arranged itself in the memory before it was half over. Too many candles, too much music, too many people in too small a space. All of them acutely aware of one another in the specific way of people who have read the same morning papers and are wondering who else has. Eleanor arrived with her mother, which had been a deliberate choice. Her mother's presence signaled family cohesion, and family cohesion in a situation like this was a form of argument. Lady Sinclair was already there when they arrived. She gave Eleanor one look, the swift, comprehensive look of a woman taking inventory, and nodded once. Eleanor nodded back. She had been in the room for 12 minutes, speaking with Mrs. Hartley's daughter about a new lending library in Bloomsbury, when she understood that Cecily Marwood was also present. She felt it before she saw it, the particular shift in a room's social current, when two people who should not both be in the same space are discovered to be in it. A small and pointed reorientation of attention. The subtle algebra of who is looking where. Eleanor turned. Cecily was across the room wearing ivory, standing with 2 women Eleanor recognized as friends of the Marwood family. She had the composed, slightly elevated bearing of a woman who has decided that the best defense is to appear to have nothing to defend. Their eyes met. Neither looked away. It was Eleanor who moved first, not toward Cecily, but sideways, continuing her conversation, demonstrating that the sight of Cecily Marwood did not require her to alter course in any direction. She talked about the lending library for 3 more minutes, and then excused herself and went to speak with Lady Sinclair. "She's here," Lady Sinclair said without turning. "I noticed. She's been telling Mrs. Henfield that the whole business is a misunderstanding manufactured by an unstable young woman." Lady Sinclair's tone was entirely neutral. "Mrs. Henfield is enjoying this considerably." Eleanor absorbed this. "What do you want to do?" Lady Sinclair turned and looked at her with the expression of a woman who finds the question self-evident. "I want to have a very loud, very pleasant conversation with you in the center of this room about the charitable work you've been doing with your father's estate tenants. And I want every person here to watch me do it." They proceeded to do exactly that. Eleanor discussed the tenant school her father had funded. Lady Sinclair asked detailed questions and made pointed observations. Her voice pitched at the precise volume that travels across a room without appearing to be aimed at it. 3 people drifted into the conversation. Then 2 more. Eleanor watched Cecily in her peripheral vision. Cecily was watching too. And the watching was costing her something. Eleanor could see it in the slight tightening around Cecily's jaw, the small adjustment she made to her posture, the way her attention kept returning to Eleanor and Lady Sinclair, even as she was speaking to someone else. Cecily was losing ground and she knew it. That was when she made the mistake. She crossed the room. Eleanor saw her coming. She did not prepare a speech or a position. She simply continued talking and let Cecily arrive. "Lady Eleanor." Cecily's voice was pleasantly modulated, warm enough to be socially impeccable. "I'm glad to see you well." The room around them had not stopped talking, but it had become quieter in the particular way that means everyone is listening. "Lady Cecily." Eleanor's voice matched hers, warm, clear, unbothered. "I received your letter. I hoped it might begin a dialogue." "It was very well written," Eleanor said, "particularly the last line, the one where you suggested I might have done the same in your position." Cecily's expression did not change. "I meant only that we are both women navigating difficult." "We are not the same," Eleanor said. It was not sharp. It was simply stated in the factual register of a woman reading the correction into a public record. "You arranged to be discovered. You chose the location and the timing and the circumstances. You used me as the mechanism to dissolve your own arrangement without taking responsibility for it. And then you wrote me a letter suggesting that I would have made the same choice." She held Cecily's gaze. "I wanted to tell you in person that I would not. Not because I'm better than you. Because I believe that the people who trust me deserve to know the truth." The silence in their immediate vicinity had spread. Lady Sinclair was perfectly still. Mrs. Henfield was not even pretending to look elsewhere. Cecily said very quietly, "You cannot prove." "I already have," Eleanor said. "Hartwell filed 3 days ago. The amended filing includes the evidence of coordination. My solicitor has your former household staff member's statement. And the Cresswell family solicitor confirmed this morning that you were the one who proposed Julian's introduction to me in the first place." She paused. "You picked me because you thought I was the kind of woman who wouldn't fight back. I'd like you to know that you were wrong about that." Cecily said nothing. She had nothing left to say. Eleanor smiled, not coldly, not triumphantly, but with the particular calm of a woman who has finished a very long piece of work and is setting down the tools. "I hope you find your way forward," she said. "I genuinely do, but not at my expense. Not again." She turned back to Lady Sinclair. The conversation about the tenant school resumed. Adrian arrived 40 minutes later, which Eleanor had not expected. She saw him at the door and felt the specific quality of surprise that comes not from shock, but from recalibration. She had not thought he would come to a social event this week, given everything in motion, and his presence here required her to update several things simultaneously. He crossed the room without hesitating, the way a man moves when he knows where he is going and is not performing the knowing. "I received Hartwell's note," he said when he reached her low enough that it didn't carry. "About the Cresswell solicitor's disclosure." "As did I." "They chose you for this." "Yes." He held her gaze for a moment, with the look she had learned by now. The one that was not exactly anger, and not exactly something warmer, but lived in the territory between precision and feeling, where this particular man was most honestly himself. "Are you all right?" he asked. It was such a simple question, so direct and undecorated. "I am," she said. "More than I expected to be." She paused. "Cecily is here. I spoke with her." Something moved through his expression. "When?" "About 40 minutes ago, before you arrived." "What happened?" "I told her the truth," Eleanor said. "In front of approximately 30 people who were pretending very hard not to listen." A pause. "Is she still here?" Eleanor glanced across the room. The ivory dress was gone. "No." He looked at her for a long moment. There was something in his face she had not seen before tonight. Not the assessment, not the careful steadiness, but something beneath those things, something that showed because the situation had stripped away the management of it. "You didn't wait for me," he said. "No." "I'm glad," he said. It was not what she had expected. She looked at him. "I mean it," he said. "I have a tendency to want to handle situations, to position myself between the problem and the person I'm—" He stopped, chose a different word. "The person I'm concerned about. That instinct is not always correct." "No," she agreed. "It isn't. You didn't need me to handle Cecily." "I didn't need anyone to handle Cecily," she said. "I needed to handle Cecily myself. There's a difference." I was quiet for a moment. Then, "I have something to tell you. It's not an easy thing to tell you, and I've been considering whether to wait, but I think waiting would be worse." Eleanor looked at him carefully. "Then tell me now." "Lady Sinclair," he said. "I spoke with her before she reached out to you, the week after Mayfair. I didn't arrange the meeting she offered you. I want to be precise about that. I did not engineer it, but I spoke to her, and I told her what had happened. And I told her that you were handling the situation with more capability and composure than anyone I had encountered, and that you deserved to know there was at least one person in London society who would not manage the story against you." Eleanor was very still. "She reached out of her own accord," he said. "Her decision, her words, her terms. But I planted the ground, and I did it without telling you." The silence between them was not empty. It had weight and texture, and it required her to sit inside it for a moment before she could know what it contained. "Why didn't you tell me?" she said. "Because I thought you would interpret it as interference, as me managing something that belonged to you." He looked at her steadily. "I was probably right about that." "You were," she said. "And I did it anyway, because I—" He stopped. "Because I could not watch you face this alone without doing something, and the most useful thing I could do without overriding your autonomy was to ensure that one person of standing knew what I knew about who you were." Eleanor looked at him for a long, careful moment. She turned this over, examined it, not looking for what she wanted to find, but for what was actually there. He had not arranged Lady Sinclair's support. He had not managed the outcome. He had done the thing that was, she understood, extremely difficult for a man of his disposition and his power. He had introduced the information and then let go of the result. "You should have told me," she said. "Yes." "Even if you thought I'd object?" "Yes." "If you do something like this again, anything you think might be interference, anything adjacent to a decision that belongs to me, I need you to tell me. Not after. Not when it's already resolved. When you do it." "Yes," he said. "That's fair." "It's not about fairness," she said. "It's about honesty. I have very little tolerance left for things being done in my vicinity that I don't know about." "I understand." He held her gaze. "I'm telling you now." She nodded once. "Thank you," she said, "for telling me." He let out a breath very quietly. It was the first unguarded physical thing she had seen him do. "She was right about you incidentally," he said. "Lady Sinclair. What she said when she reached out, she called you formidable. She is not liberal with that word." "No," Eleanor said. "She is not. She was also right," he said, "that you deserve to know someone was not against you." He paused. "I want you to know that. Not as the man who spoke to Lady Sinclair 3 weeks ago. As the man standing in this room tonight. You have never been without someone in your corner." Eleanor looked at him. The Cavendish reception went on around them. Music and voices, and the clink of glasses, and the slow movement of a London evening going about its business. And she stood in the middle of it and looked at this man who had crouched on a staircase to make sure she was actually all right, and had let her make every decision, and had told the truth when it would have been much easier not to, and had just told it again. "I know," she said. The 2 words were simple, and they meant everything she intended them to mean. The formal settlement arrived on Friday. The Cresswell family accepted the penalty clause in full. The dissolution was entered into record as initiated by breach of conduct on Lord Julian Cresswell's part. No mutual framing, no apportioned blame. The record stated in the flat and unambiguous language of legal documentation what had occurred and who had caused it. Hartwell sent the confirmation to Ashcombe House at noon. Eleanor read it at her desk, set it down, and sat quietly for a moment. Not with the feeling she had expected, not triumph, not relief exactly. Something more like the feeling of putting down a heavy bag after a long walk. The particular physical awareness of weight that has been there so long, you had stopped noticing it suddenly and completely absent. She wrote to Adrian, "It's done. The filing is confirmed. The penalty clause stands." Eleanor. His reply came in 2 hours. "I know. My solicitor notified me this morning. I've been waiting to hear it from you. Congratulations is not the right word. I'm not sure what the right word is. Adrian." She read that twice, and something warm moved through her that she did not try to manage or name. She wrote back, "I think the right word is accurate. The record is accurate. That's what I wanted." He replied, "Then you have it. Come to Ravensmere House on Sunday if you're able. Not for business. I'd like to show you the library." She looked at that sentence for a moment. Not for business. She wrote Sunday at 2 o'clock. She folded the note, sealed it, sent it, and went downstairs to tell her father that Hartwell's work was complete. The Marwood situation resolved itself the following week with less ceremony than Eleanor had expected, and considerably more speed. The expanded filing, which named both Cecily and Julian, and documented the coordinated nature of the arrangement, created a legal position from which the Marwood family had no clean exit. Cecily's father, who had been largely silent throughout, engaged a new solicitor on Monday. By Wednesday, the new solicitor had contacted Hartwell directly, bypassing the original Marwood representation entirely. The agreement they proposed was straightforward. Full acknowledgement on behalf of Lady Cecily Marwood of conduct constituting breach of social compact with the Duke of Ravensmere. No penalty clause had existed in that engagement's terms, the financial clause. Cecily had attempted to embed, had never been signed, but the acknowledgement itself was what mattered. It would be on record. It would be known. Hartwell brought the documents to Ashcombe House on Thursday afternoon, and Eleanor signed as a witnessing party to the resolution of the Cresswell settlement. She read every page. She made 2 minor corrections to language that she felt imprecisely represented the timeline. Hartwell accepted both corrections without discussion. When he left, she sat with her father in the quiet of the study, and neither of them spoke for a moment. "It's over," her father said. "The legal part," she said. "Yes." He looked at her. "And the rest?" She considered. "The rest takes longer. The conversations in rooms won't stop immediately. Julian will be in London for another season at least. Cecily." She stopped. "Cecily will find her next arrangement. She is very good at arrangements. And you." She looked at her father. This man who had taught her to read an account ledger and had sat in his study listening to her present a case he had not known she was building and had given her his full authority without being asked twice. "I am going to Ravensmere House on Sunday," she said. He absorbed this for a moment. "For business?" he asked. "No," she said. "Not for business." Lord Ashcombe nodded slowly, with the expression of a man who is adjusting his picture of the future in real time and finding it on the whole satisfactory. "The library at Ravensmere is exceptional," he said. "I've heard it said." "I'll let you know," Eleanor said. Sunday arrived with the particular quality of May in London, the light softer than April, the cold, not quite gone, but making a genuine effort, the air carrying the green and faint sweetness of things that have survived winter and are beginning cautiously to believe in it. She arrived at Ravensmere House at 2 o'clock. She was shown upstairs by a butler who had the excellent quality of making her feel expected rather than inspected. Adrian was in the library. He looked up when she came in, and something eased in his expression that suggested he had been working and was genuinely glad of the interruption, which she found unexpectedly endearing. The library was everything her father had implied, and several things he had not mentioned floor to ceiling. 2 levels, a rolling ladder light coming from long windows that faced the garden books, organized with the completeness of a man who takes his reading seriously. She walked in slowly, reading spines, and Adrian watched her without saying anything, which was one of the things she had come to trust about him, that he did not fill silence with noise simply to fill it. "How long have you been collecting?" she said. "I inherited about 400. The rest I've acquired myself over 20 years. He came to stand near her at the shelves where the histories ran. "My father was not a reader. He thought libraries were for display. So I used to come in here as a boy and take books out and put them back before he noticed." Eleanor looked at him. "You were a secret reader, an extremely dedicated one." There was something in his voice, the warmth of a memory he didn't often share audible through the usual containment. "I read everything in this room twice before I turned 18, most of it 3 times. She turned to look at the full sweep of the room. "It's extraordinary. I thought you'd find it so." He said it simply, without pretension. She looked at him. "Why?" "Because you are the kind of person who has always read more than she's been given credit for, understanding." It was so precisely the right thing to say, and said, so without performance, that she felt it in the very particular way you feel things that hit exactly where you live. "Adrian," she said. He waited. "I want to say something that I have been thinking about for several days, and I want to say it now before we go back to books and comfortable silences, because I think once we go to the books and the comfortable silences, we may not say it for a long time, and I don't want that." He was still, very attentive. "What we have done together over these past weeks," she said, "has been legal and strategic and necessary, and I am glad we did every part of it. But it was also something else, something I did not expect, and have not fully found the words for." She held his gaze. "I came into this because we were both betrayed, and I expected to come out of it with my dignity intact and my legal standing confirmed, and perhaps a cautious respect between 2 people who had faced a difficult thing together." She paused. "I did not expect to come out of it with—" She stopped. "I don't know what to call what I mean." Adrian was quiet for a moment. "I know what you mean," he said. Do you? Yes. He looked at her with the full steadiness of a man who has read something 4 times to make sure he's understanding it correctly. I mean the same thing. I've been sitting with it since the Cavendish reception. Since before that, honestly. Since you came to this house 4 weeks ago and told me you wanted the truth to be undeniable. He paused. I think what you're trying to say is that what began as necessity has become something you didn't budget for. That's very economically put, she said, and something in her voice threatened to become a smile. I am a very economical person. And there it was, not quite a smile, but the thing that lived one breath from one on his face, which she had seen twice now and found she very much wanted to see again. Eleanor. His voice changed. Not softer, more present. I am not going to ask you for anything. I made that clear in my letter, and I meant it. You have had enough of people deciding what you should be in relation to them. He held her gaze. But I want you to know whatever you decide about the future, whatever comes next, I am not going anywhere. Not out of obligation, not because of what we've built together legally or socially. He paused. Because I would very much rather have you in my life in whatever form that takes than not. Eleanor looked at him for a long time. She thought about the staircase at Mayfair. The first unsigned note. The phrase, "The decision remains yours," 3 weeks ago from a man who could have made every decision himself and chose not to. She thought about him reading her letter 4 times. She thought about what it felt like to be seen by someone who looks carefully and does not look away. I'm not going anywhere either, she said. The library was quiet around them. Outside London went about its business indifferent and relentless as always. But in this extraordinary room, that a serious boy had once loved secretly, and a contained man had filled over 20 years, something shifted. Nothing dramatic, no declaration, no ceremony. Only 2 people standing near the histories having told each other the truth and choosing to stay. That was enough. That was, she thought, actually everything. She turned back to the shelves. Tell me what you've read 3 times, she said. He came to stand beside her. We'll need to sit down, he said. The list is long. I have time, Eleanor said. And for the first time since April the 14th, she meant it without qualification. She had all the time she needed, and she was at last the one deciding what to do with it. Checking requirements before writing, the weeks that followed the Sunday in the library had a quality Eleanor had not experienced in a very long time, the quality of time that belongs to you. Not time organized around someone else's expectations, or shaped by the management of a situation, or spent in the careful maintenance of a piece that was never entirely real. Simply time. Hers. She used it well. She went back to the tenant schoolwork she had let lapse during the worst weeks of April and May. She wrote 3 letters she had owed since winter. She visited her grandmother in Bath for 4 days, and sat with her in the afternoons, and listened to stories she had heard before, and found this time that she had more patience for them, not less, as she might have expected, but more, as though the events of the past month had recalibrated something in her relationship to time, and made her less frightened of sitting still inside it. She saw Adrian twice a week. Not because it had been arranged. It had not been arranged, nothing between them was arranged, which was one of the things she found she trusted most about it. He wrote when he had something to say. She replied when she was ready. He came when she was willing, and she came when she chose, and the rhythm of it built itself without either of them having to construct it. They talked about books most often. They talked about the estate matters his solicitor had flagged, and her father's land questions that she found herself curious about in a way she had not previously given herself permission to be. They talked about the tenant school, and he asked questions about it that showed he had retained what she'd said the previous week, which she noticed and did not comment on, but filed in the part of her that was paying careful attention. He did not press her about the future. She was aware of this. The absence of pressure was itself a form of presence. A deliberate choice made consistently to let her be where she was, without indicating that she needed to be somewhere further along. She had not known until she experienced the contrast how much of her previous life had been spent in the low-grade anxiety of someone who is perpetually behind on a schedule she did not make. There was no schedule here. There was only this unfolding at the pace it chose. Charlotte noticed. Charlotte noticed everything, which was both the gift and the particular burden of a younger sister, who is clever enough to be accurate and young enough to be direct about it. She appeared in Eleanor's room on a Tuesday evening in late May, sat in the chair by the window, without being invited, and said, "You look different." Eleanor was at the writing table. "Different how? Like you're not waiting for something." Charlotte tilted her head. "You've always been waiting for something, even when you were engaged. Especially when you were engaged. Like the actual thing was always just around a corner." She paused. "You don't look like that now." Eleanor set down her pen. "No," she said. "I'm not." "Is it him, the Duke?" "It's me," Eleanor said. "He's part of what me looks like now, but it's mine." Charlotte was quiet for a moment, absorbing this with the thoughtful expression of a girl who is working out how to apply something she has just learned to her own future. "That's a good answer," she said finally. "Thank you," Eleanor said, and picked up her pen. Charlotte did not leave. She stayed in the chair which Eleanor had expected, because Charlotte never arrived with only one thing to say. "Eleanor," she said, "there's something I need to tell you. I've been deciding whether to since the Pemberton dinner." Eleanor looked up. Charlotte's expression had changed. The lightness was gone. What was there instead was the look of a girl who has been carrying something that belongs to someone else and is not entirely sure how to put it down. "Tell me," Eleanor said. "At the Pemberton dinner." Charlotte said carefully, "I was standing near the window with Mrs. Hartley's daughter. Near the alcove where Mrs. Henfield was speaking with two women from the Marwood family's circle." Eleanor waited. "I wasn't trying to listen," Charlotte said. "But I was close and the room was loud and they were not being particularly quiet." She stopped, started again. One of the women said something about Lady Cecily. She said, and I remember this precisely because it stopped me completely, she said, "Cecily told me in February that the Ashcombe girl would make a convenient difficulty to step around. That the whole thing would resolve itself very tidily once she had seen what she needed to see." The room was very still. Eleanor set the pen down. "February," she said. "Yes." "That's 2 months before Mayfair." "Yes." Eleanor sat with this for a long moment. She was not surprised exactly. She had known since reading Cecily's letter the particular afternoon at Madame Rouchard's was not as it may have appeared entirely unplanned, that the timing was deliberate. But February. 2 months of Cecily telling people in her circle that Eleanor Ashcombe would be a convenient difficulty, that the resolution would be tidy. She had been discussed. At dinner tables, in drawing rooms, by women who did not know her and had decided she was a manageable obstacle in someone else's plan. Charlotte was watching her carefully. "Are you all right?" "Yes." Eleanor looked at her sister steadily. "This doesn't hurt me now the way it would have hurt me in April. It makes me angry, but the anger is clean." She paused. "Why did you wait to tell me?" "Because in April you were already carrying enough, and then because things were moving so quickly, I kept thinking there would be a better moment." Charlotte looked at her hands. "And then because I was afraid you'd think I should have told you sooner, and you'd be right." "You should have told me sooner," Eleanor said. "But I understand why you didn't. And it matters now not as evidence the case is closed, but because I needed to know how early this started." She looked at her sister. "Thank you for telling me now." Charlotte nodded. She looked relieved, the specific relief of someone who has set something down that was too heavy for her to keep carrying. "Does the Duke know?" she said. "He'll know tonight," Eleanor said, and picked up her pen to write the note. She sent the note to Ravensmere House by early afternoon. His reply came at 4 o'clock. "Come this evening if you're able. We can walk in the garden if the weather holds. Adrian." The weather held. They walked along the garden path at Ravensmere House in the quiet of a May evening that smelled of earth and grass and the faint sweetness of something blooming near the far wall, and Eleanor told him what Charlotte had said. He listened without interrupting. He did that consistently, the full contained attention of a man who understands that listening and waiting to speak are not the same thing. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "February," he said. "Yes." She told people in her social circle that you would be a convenient difficulty to step around. 2 months before Mayfair. Yes. That means she had already decided what she intended to do before the fittings were scheduled. His voice was even, but the evenness was doing work. She chose Madame Rouchard's because it was the logical venue once both appointments existed to engineer the encounter. She didn't create the appointment to create the encounter. She waited for both to exist naturally and then moved to align them. Which is worse, Eleanor said, in a way. It's more patient, more careful. Yes. They walked for a moment without speaking. Does this change anything for you? He asked. Practically. No. The case is closed. The record is accurate. Hartwell has everything he needs. She paused. But it clarifies something for me about what this actually was. It wasn't impulsive. It wasn't a situation that got out of hand. Cecily Marwood made a series of deliberate decisions over a long period, and the last one involved positioning me as the mechanism for her exit. She looked at him. And I walked through that door. You could not have known, he said. I know I couldn't. She stopped walking. That's not what I mean. I mean I walked through that door and what I found destroyed everything I thought my life was. And in the weeks since then, I have rebuilt from that destruction something I didn't have before. Something I couldn't have had before because I was too busy maintaining the arrangement. She paused. Cecily chose me because she thought I was easy to use. She was wrong. But she was the one who put me in the room where I discovered what I was actually capable of. Adrian looked at her for a long moment. I've thought about something similar, he said. What I would have been 12 months from now if it hadn't happened. If I had married Cecily and the financial clause had been buried deep enough that I didn't find it until after. If I had gone on being the version of myself that confused control with care. He was quiet. I would have been very contained, very managed, very correct. He paused. I would not have read a letter 4 times. She looked at him. Something moved in her chest, the particular warmth of a sentence that hits the place where the real thing lives. They stood in the May garden, and the evening settled around them, and Eleanor thought, this is the future I built, not the one I was placed in, not the one someone arranged because they calculated I'd be compliant. This one which came out of the worst thing that had happened to her and was hers in a way that nothing before it had been. What came next, she had not prepared for. Not because it was sudden. Adrian was not a man who did things suddenly. It was the quality of it that she hadn't anticipated. She had imagined in the abstract what a proposal from him might look like. She had imagined it would be precise and formal, and contain the kind of language that is technically emotional, but structured enough to feel safe. She had not imagined this. They had come back inside to the library because the evening had turned cool, and Eleanor had not brought a heavier wrap, and Adrian had built up the fire, and they had sat not opposite each other as they usually did, but both on the same side of the fireplace, which was a small thing, and had shifted everything. She was reading. He was not. He had been quiet for 10 minutes in a way that had a different quality from his usual quiet. She had learned to distinguish between his silences, and this one had weight moving through it. She set down the book. He was looking at the fire. Adrian, she said. I'm about to say something, he said. And I need you to let me finish it before you respond, because I've found the beginning several times this week and abandoned it, and if I abandon it again, I will have lost something I'm not willing to lose. She turned slightly. She waited. He looked at the fire for one more moment. Then he looked at her. When I was 22, he said, I decided that love was a luxury that men in my position could not reliably afford. That what I could afford was respect, compatibility, and mutual benefit. I told myself this was maturity. I told myself it was the responsible position for a man with responsibilities. He paused. I was 22 and I was wrong, but I didn't know I was wrong until I was 35, and standing on a staircase next to a woman who was white as paper and still entirely herself. And something in me recognized something in her that I had no language for at the time. She did not move. I have spent the past 6 weeks working very hard not to confuse what I feel for you with gratitude for what we survived together, he said. Because you deserve better than gratitude dressed up as something larger. And every time I examined it, held it up, looked at it from every angle, tried to trace it back to its source, it did not resolve into gratitude. It did not resolve into admiration or respect, or the satisfaction of shared purpose, though it contains all of those. He looked at her directly. It resolves into the specific and irreducible fact that you are the person I want to be honest with, for the rest of my life. Not because honesty is virtuous, but because you are the only person I have found it genuinely difficult to be anything else with. The fire ticked. Outside London was doing what London always did. I almost managed you, he said, and his voice changed on those words, quieter and more serious, carrying the weight of a man making a genuine accounting. In the beginning, I almost stepped in front of things instead of alongside them. I almost made the decisions that belong to you, because I am trained to make decisions, and you were in pain, and everything in me wanted to fix it. He held her gaze. That instinct is not gone. It will not be gone. It is who I am, and I am asking you to take me with full knowledge of that, with the understanding that I know it is wrong, and that I will keep telling you when I've done it. If you will keep telling me when I have not noticed. She was very still. I am not asking you to need me, he said. I know very well that you don't in the fundamental sense, and I find it... A pause. I find it the most important thing about you. I am asking whether you are willing to choose me, deliberately with full information, the same way you have made every other decision in the past 6 weeks yours from the beginning without anyone's hand on the scale. She sat with that for a moment that was long and necessary. She had thought about this. She had thought about it in the bath afternoons with her grandmother, and on the Tuesday mornings at the writing table and in the library. Last Sunday when he had stood beside her at the shelves, and she had felt what it was to be stood beside rather than managed or replaced or performed at. She had thought about the difference between choosing and being chosen, and what it meant that for the first time in her life, she was in a position where both were true simultaneously. You said you almost managed me, she said. Yes. What stopped you? He looked at her steadily. You did. Every time. You were always one step ahead of the place where I was going to overstep, and by the time I arrived there, you had already gone through it yourself. He paused. You made it very difficult to rescue you. Good, she said. Yes, he agreed. Good. She looked at the fire for a moment, then back at him. I want to tell you something, she said, before I answer, because you were honest with me about your failing, and I want to be honest about mine. He waited. I spent 11 months believing that if I was patient enough and good enough and present enough, Julian would eventually see what I was worth. She said it plainly. That was not love. That was an arrangement I had convinced myself was love. And the reason I convinced myself so thoroughly is that I had been taught in every way a woman can be taught something without being directly told that a man's eventual recognition was the measure of a woman's value. She held his gaze. I am not healed of that entirely. I will probably catch myself seeking the recognition before I've remembered that I don't need it. I wanted you to know that, because you are asking to be in a life with me, and that habit will show up sometimes, and it will not be about you. I know, he said, and when it does, I will not exploit it. He paused. I will probably say something economical and unhelpful, and then remember to say something true. She felt a smile pull at the corner of her mouth. She did not try to stop it. Adrian, she said. He waited. Yes, she said. Deliberately and with full information, I choose you. Something happened to his face. Not the almost smile, something beyond that, something she had not seen before. Something that was the expression of a man who has spent a very long time being precisely correct, and has just been offered something that makes precision irrelevant. He reached out and took her hand, not dramatically, not with the performed tenderness of a man who has practiced the gesture. Simply took it the way you take hold of something you mean to keep. She let him. So, they told their families in June, which produced two entirely different responses that Eleanor found in retrospect very revealing. Her mother cried, which Eleanor had expected, and then immediately began discussing venue and season, which Eleanor had also expected, and then stopped herself mid-sentence and looked at Eleanor with an expression that was new and asked, "What do you want?" "For the wedding itself, what do you actually want?" Eleanor told her. It was not what Lady Ashcombe would have chosen, and her mother listened to all of it and said, "Then that is what we'll do." It was, Eleanor thought, one of the better conversations she had ever had with her mother. Her father shook Adrian's hand for a long time without saying anything and then said, "Take care of her, not instead of her, alongside her." Adrian said, "That is precisely my intention." Lord Ashcombe nodded and went to find the claret. Julian was seen in London in July with a woman whose family was considerably less connected than the Ashcombes, which society noted and then moved on from, which was how London handled men whose choices had narrowed their options without destroying them entirely. Eleanor heard about it from Charlotte, who mentioned it the way you mention something of mild historical interest, and Eleanor realized she felt nothing in particular, not bitterness, not vindication, not the residue of old feeling. Simply the absence of him, which was, she found, a relief. Cecily did not remain in London. She had left in June, gone to family relations in the country, which was the Victorian method of removing someone from a story that had become inconvenient. Eleanor did not know where exactly and did not need to. What she knew was that the record was accurate. The acknowledgement existed. What Cecily had done was documented in the formal language of settlement and legal record, which did not expire and could not be rewritten. That was what Eleanor had asked for from the beginning. The truth undeniable. She had it. It was Lady Sinclair who said the final thing. She said it at a morning call in July with 5 other women in the room, which meant she was saying it to all of London by nightfall. She looked at Eleanor seated across from her with the composure that had become by now simply how Eleanor was not a performance, but a settled quality, and said, "When all of this began, I told you I was doing it because I find it tiresome when the wrong people win. I want to correct that now." The room was very attentive. "I did it," Lady Sinclair said, "because you are the best example I have seen in some years of what it looks like when a woman decides that her own judgment is worth trusting. That is rarer than it should be, and it deserves to be named." Eleanor held her gaze. "Thank you, Lady Sinclair," she said. "Don't thank me." The older woman picked up her cup. "Just continue." Eleanor almost smiled. "I intend to." August came, and with it the particular restlessness of a London summer, and the sense that everything was about to shift. Seasons end, houses closing the city, thinning toward the country. Eleanor discovered she was expecting on a Tuesday morning in August, 11 weeks after the Sunday in the library. She sat with it quietly for an hour before she told anyone. Not from shock, she had been aware in the practical way of a woman who pays attention to her own body that something had changed in the past weeks. But she had not wanted to name it until she was certain, and she had not wanted to be certain until she was ready for what certain meant. Ready meant ready to receive it as hers, not as a development in someone else's story, not as the next expected event in a sequence she was moving through. As hers, a life she had chosen confirming itself. She was ready. She told Agnes first because Agnes had been first for most of the significant things in Eleanor's life, and it seemed right to maintain the pattern. Agnes received the information with the expression of someone who is very happy and is allowing herself to be very happy without hedging it. "Does His Grace know?" Agnes asked. "I'm going to tell him this afternoon." "Will you write it?" "No," Eleanor said. "This one I tell in person." She arrived at Ravensmere House at 2 o'clock. She was shown to the study where Adrian was at his desk with the focused expression of a man in the middle of something he was genuinely absorbed in. He looked up when she came in. He saw her face. He set down the pen. "Eleanor." His voice changed on her name, not alarm, but the shift of a man recalibrating rapidly. "What's happened?" She sat down across from him. She did not build to it. "I'm expecting," she said. "Our child. Sometime in February, I believe." The silence that followed was brief and complete. Adrian sat very still. She watched something move through him, Not the controlled movement of a man managing his response, but the actual movement of feeling, crossing a face that had for once stopped managing anything. He looked at her with an expression she had no word for in the language of precision and strategy and careful documentation. It was something entirely outside that vocabulary. His eyes went bright very briefly. He looked down at the desk. He breathed. Then he looked back up at her. "February," he said. "Yes." He reached across the desk and took her hand, both hands, holding them in the way that meant something he was not going to put into a sentence right now because the sentence wasn't ready. She let him. They sat like that for a long moment in the study that smelled of leather and cedar and old books and the faint warmth of a summer afternoon. And Eleanor felt it settle through her, not like the relief of something ending, but like the rightness of something beginning. Not the tentative conditional beginning she had lived in for 11 months before Mayfair. Something built on ground she had cleared herself, tested herself, and found solid. "February," Adrian said again, and there was something in the repetition that was not redundancy, but the sound of a man placing a word in the future and watching it become real. "February," she confirmed. He brought her hands up and pressed them against his mouth for a moment briefly, and it was the most unguarded thing she had ever seen him do. Then he set them down, cleared his throat, and said with the precise and economical affect of a man returning to function, "I need to speak to the solicitor about the estate provisions." Eleanor looked at him. "This week," he added. "Of course," she said. "This week." The almost smile was there. She matched it. She sat back in her chair and looked around the study at the books, the desk, the window that faced the street where London was doing what London always did, and she felt the full weight and texture of where she was and how she had come to be here. Not placed, not arranged, not selected by someone's calculation of her compliance. Here, because she had walked through a door 11 weeks ago. No, not 11 weeks. 16. She had walked through a door 4 months ago at Madame Rouchard's and found something that destroyed the future she had been assembled for, and she had picked herself up off the floor of it and built something that was entirely her own construction, with her own hands, from her own judgment. She had been chosen as the easy one, the convenient one, the one who wouldn't cause difficulty. She had caused considerable difficulty. She found she had no regrets about that whatsoever. The wedding was in September. Small, which had been Eleanor's choice, and beautiful in the particular way of things that are not trying to be anything other than exactly what they are. Ashcombe Manor, not Ravensmere House. Again Eleanor's choice, because she had wanted to begin in the place where she had been formed, rather than the place she was moving toward. Lady Sinclair attended and sat in the front row, and did not cry, because she did not do that, but pressed Eleanor's hand when they passed each other afterward, with a pressure that said everything the words didn't. Charlotte was radiant, which was her natural state, and managed to avoid saying, "I told you so," for the entire day, which Eleanor noted and appreciated. Her father walked her in. He did not cry either, but his jaw worked in the way it did when he was holding something in, and at the moment, he placed her hand in Adrian's. He looked at his daughter with an expression that said everything he had not found the right words for in 30 years of fatherhood. She looked back at him. She understood. Adrian was waiting. Not with the look of a man at the end of a social obligation. With the look of a man who has arrived somewhere he intends to remain. She took his hand. In front of the people who mattered to her in the house where she had learned to read and to organize accounts and to hold her ground. Even when holding her ground was lonely. Eleanor Ashcombe made a promise to a man who had told her the truth from the beginning and had told it again every time she needed him to. She meant every word she said. She had chosen every word carefully. Not because the occasion required it, because she was a woman who had learned at some cost that precision was not coldness and honesty was not danger. And the truth plainly told fully meant was the only foundation worth building on. In February, when the snow was still on the ground and the morning light was thin and gray-silver, a son was born at Ravensmere House. Adrian was present, which was unusual for men of his position and his time, and he was present because Eleanor had told him she wanted him there, and he had not offered a single objection. He held the child with the focused attention of a man who has decided this is the most important thing he has ever been required to do correctly. Eleanor watched him from where she lay, tired in the specific bone-deep way of a woman who has just done something extraordinary, and she watched his face as he looked at this new person they had made, and she saw in him everything she had come to know over the past 10 months. The precision, the steadiness, the almost smile that had become in private, simply a smile, and underneath all of it, the realness of a man who had stopped managing and started living somewhere in the middle of a very bad April. "He looks like you," Adrian said, looking at the child. Then he looked at Eleanor. "The jaw." "His jaw is enormous," Eleanor said. "He looks like a very small Roman senator." Adrian looked back at the child with a seriousness she recognized was concealing profound delight. "He's remarkable." "He is," Eleanor said. "So far he has done nothing but exist. But he is doing it remarkably." Adrian carried the child to her. He did not hand him over immediately. He sat on the edge of the bed beside her and held the child between them for a moment, the three of them in the particular quiet that is not emptiness, but fullness. The quiet of a room containing something so completely itself that nothing needs to be added. Eleanor looked at her son. She thought about April, about a door in Mayfair, and a box of wedding lace on a floor, and the cold of a staircase under her hands. She thought about the letter she had written that first night, the one she had not been ready for and had thrown into the fire. She thought about Hartwell's office and Martha Greer's green notebook, and the way Lady Sinclair had looked at her and said the word formidable as though it were a simple fact, which it was. She thought about 7 letters and 5 months, and the particular calculation of a woman who had looked at Eleanor Ashcombe and seen a convenient thing to move around. She thought about the record. Accurate, documented, permanent. And then she stopped thinking about any of it, because her son made a small and undignified sound, and she looked down at him, and the past receded to exactly the right distance, not erased, not pretended away, but properly behind her where the past belongs. She had lost the future she had imagined. She had built the future she deserved. They were not the same future, and she was grateful with the clean and total gratitude of someone who has been shown the difference and understood it completely, that they were not. "What shall we name him?" Adrian said. She had been thinking about this. "James," she said, "for my grandfather, and William for yours." He considered. "James William." "Or William James," she said. "I haven't decided which order." "Take your time," he said. She looked at him. He looked back. "You have all the time you need," he said, "and you are the one deciding." Eleanor Ashcombe. Eleanor Wycliffe, Duchess of Ravensmere. If one needed the full accounting, looked at her husband and her son in the February light, and she made the decision as she had learned to make all decisions clearly from her own authority with full knowledge of what she was choosing. "William James," she said, and that was that. And it was enough. And it was in every way that mattered entirely hers.